43. We'll continue on with meeting. We're under ordinances and action items. This is item number 15. The subject is a proposed amendment to the professional consulting services agreement between the City of Cupertino and HDL Econ Solutions of an additional $40,800 as an extension of the contract terms and conditions to provide supplemental economic development staffing services for Cupertino through the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2021. This was previously heard on April 20th, and now it's being brought back after certain inquiries made by members of City Council have been answered. And so, Madam City Manager, did you want to provide any kind of update to Council and the public before we'll field questions from Council, followed by members of the public and their commentary? And Deb, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry, I had to double unmute. Okay, gotcha. I just wanted to, provide context. We do have the presentation prepared to go through this as if. And what I would like to say for the benefit of the public as well is that the economic development manager position with the city is ready for advertisement probably this week for a competitive placement on city staff. So I thought that might make people feel better about this particular item. And then other than that, there is in your staff report, I'll draw your attention to a couple of different amounts. And that is one amount to actually just pay off the bills and one amount to extend the support through June, so we don't have a gap. But it's certainly council's choice. So with that, I would like to invite Ben Fu, the community development director, to run through the presentations, and we will answer any questions council has.
Okay, thank you, Madam City Manager. Director Fu.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Madam City Manager, City Council. Ben Fu, Director of Community Development. Sharing my screen here. All right, hopefully it's coming up okay.
Yes.
It's a pretty similar, thank you, Mr. Mayor, for confirming it. It's pretty similar presentation from last time. I added a couple notes, maybe a table as well. I'll run this through fairly quickly. All the information is in the staff report, along with the attachments as well. Like the mayor had mentioned, the particular item is the amendment to the consulting agreement for an additional $40,800 to extend the services through the current fiscal year ending on June 30th, 2021. Current contract has a not to exceed $170,000, $10,000 of which was earmarked for marketing and research, so it's not on a hourly calculation as indicated in the third bullet point here, $170 per hour. That calculates to 941 hours, similar to a part-time staff. As of March 31, we have accumulated 1,025 work hours, or $184,250. I think that what I want to point out is the second table on the bottom here. And last time at the hearing, I hear from some council members who wanted to see sort of break down the hours per month. As you can see, from July through October, pretty heavy, and most of those is due to the COVID-19 response. It started to taper off quite a bit. March was a little unexpected. However, it's with the Torrey Avenue purchasing efforts that really kind of bumped up the hours there. So it was anticipated, again, that we would use approximately 78 hours a month to remain adequate service for ED development. Obviously, COVID-19 pandemic, as I mentioned, was not expected and really put a burden on our services and the hours as well. So this is just a list of items as outlined in the staff report as well. The increased staff hour work items due to COVID-19. This list also reflected in the staff report is an ongoing and typical ED work. So the proposed contract amendment, as you heard me say earlier, is a $40,800 to get us through the current fiscal year. We are currently about 14,250 over the contract amount. The remainder of the 40,000 will be 26,550. That will cover us through end of fiscal year. So a couple recommended actions as Madam City Manager mentioned, we could either approve the proposed amendment for the additional 40,000 or approve the contract amendment for the payment of the 14,000 that's currently over the contract amount. With that, I will conclude my presentation and available for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Director Fu. Are there any questions of staff on the presentation? Councilmember Wei.
Yes, so I just want some clarification. The overtime that's unexpected because of COVID help, with the economic packages and with outreach to business, is that why the contract time exceeding expected work time?
Yes, that's correct. For the bulk of last summer, as well as fall, you see the hours nearly double than what we anticipated.
Thank you.
Councilmember Moore.
Okay, so I just wanted to clarify that it actually isn't overtime. It's over what you anticipated, because the hours were all less than 160 hours per month.
Right. Correct.
Okay.
It's the number exceeded the number of hours expected.
Okay, and just to clarify, so we had an economic development manager that worked for the city until November 2nd, 2019.
Correct.
Okay, and then she went to work for HDL. And
correct.
Did that contract come to the city council, or how did that, not sure I followed, how did that contract come into being?
Are you talking about the original HDL contract, or are you talking about the contract let in July of 2020?
The original one. So how did that, what was the process for how we had an employee that then went to go work for another company, and so how did the business then go to that company? So
almost every city has a contract with HDL Econ Services. So if I recall correctly, in 2019, I modified the contract to add a task for economic development when Angela Sway moved to HDL to provide a continuity of services, because we would not be able to onboard somebody in her stead in the 2 weeks notice that was given. So that was the initial piece. Then in July of 2020, a separate contract from the original HDL contract was let for her services that you all are seeing currently through the current period. And that was done under city manager's authority. To answer your original question, my procurement authority is $175,000, which I use rarely, but in this case, I used it for continuity because we just, didn't rehire. And so I heard council loud and clear that you felt that these kinds of services are core, which I agree with. It just happened to be a timing thing. And we have prepared a vacancy announcement to put it back on staff.
So I was given the City of Cupertino purchasing policy, and it actually, to me, looks like, for type professional services, which I would assume that this falls under, that there's a form. It says petty cash voucher up to $75 or check request or partial receipt of purchase order with or without contract. The categories for greater than 175,000 says no bidding required, and the form is authorized by the department head, which would be the manager, and the contract approved by city manager / city council. So, and then if it's less than 175,000, the form is authorized by the department head. So when this says the contract's approved by city manager / city council, if a single contract is greater than 175,000, council would get to see it.
Absolutely.
Okay. And there's no bidding required. Okay, and we don't have any revolving door policy about having a former employee go to a contract, and no 1 year wait or anything like that. Okay.
Not that I am aware.
Okay, and here the contract is over 175,000, and so I'm assuming the trigger that it's coming to council is because of that amendment going over the 175.
Correct.
Okay, interesting. Now, when I looked in the budget for this coming year, it was a budget of looked like it was over $300,000. And then when I looked at the costs, it looks as though economic development is over the past few years doubled in cost, which is concerning. Yeah, so I'm going to leave it at that. I'll ask some other questions in a minute.
Thank you, Councilmember Moore. Vice Mayor Chow.
Hi. So I'm wondering what's the normal process for a contract when the consultant hours go over the contracted hour? Do they need to get pre-approval before they continue to work? What's the normal process? I thought like the public works, usually we will get item on the council agenda that, okay, it's expected to go over. So this usually happens before, right? So I'm just wondering what's the process.
In general, most of our contracts are bid, meaning we put them out for a request for proposals and they're competitively bid. And then it comes back with, you when in your bid, you put a scope, you put the desired, what you need on the contract for consulting, for example. And then when it comes back, they've bid a certain amount. So that is then brought to council saying to give me authorization to let the contract. And then we rarely, if that I know of, have overruns of the similar nature. Let me make sure I've answered on behalf of staff correctly. I know that all public works contracts are bid.
So my question is, how is overrun usually handled? Who monitors it so that to ensure there is no overrun? Or get alert that there is overrun, we should watch out and try to budget hours. How is that usually handled?
So if I may, I think generally that is handled by a monitoring of the manager, whoever the manager is or department head of that functionality. In this case, obviously it's the COVID pandemic. It's a little bit unique in that, and also the transition of the economic development from the city manager's office to the community development department. But we were monitoring the tasks and the hours. Unfortunately, there are just too many sort of COVID-related items that we had to deal with. But we were monitoring that as we were hitting February. We started seeing the reduction of the hours. We made efforts to transition some of the tasks to internal for support as much as possible to try to reduce those hours. But again, it just it's the pandemic and it's a little bit unpredicted, so that's why.
So does the contractor need approval from any of the city staff members when they are approved to spend how many hours on a certain project? Are they required to provide an estimate so that
projects are? I apologize, Vice Mayor. Didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
Yeah, so that we have an idea how many hours, because as I looked at, it used to be a part-time, but 30 hours per week. That accounts to about 1,330 hours a year. And then the contract that we signed is 941 hours. That means even in a normal year, we are expected to overrun. And then that means we should be already budgeting that, okay, we cannot rely on the consultant for everyday things that we cannot be doing business as usual at $170 per hour, because it's 941 is a lot less than 1300. So not only the COVID, and
If
now, so how are we managing? What process we have put in place? That's, and then another thing is in the contract, any written language.
if I may,
What
Vice,
happens when
Vice,
it go over? Okay, yeah.
sure. Let me just first. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Director Fu. We can hear you.
I think he's having technical issues as well. Hold on.
His video was freezing up a bit too.
I apologize. Can you guys hear me? Sorry about that. Let me first address Vice Mayor Chow regarding the hours to be expected for part-time staff. We estimated this position would use roughly 78 hours or so per month. That would add up to approximately 936, 940 hours. So it's well within the estimated hours for part-time staff. And that was anticipated prior to COVID. That was pretty standard for this position that we've experienced in the past couple of years or so. So with the increased demand on the immediate ability to address some of the pandemic-related issues, we really didn't have any other staff on hand that had the capability to address those. So they naturally fall within this position that has some experience dealing with that. So, and that's why you see the jump in the hours. Now, in terms of monitoring, we do obviously the tasks were assigned by the manager or by the department head. So it's not like it's a package deal of assignments rolled over to HDL. These tasks were assigned when it was in the city manager's office by the city manager. As you can see from the list of tasks, it kind of ranges within all the various different departments, right? City manager's office, public works, and Parks and Rec and community development. So
Okay.
we obviously will have to coordinate on the assignments.
Yeah. So my last question was, in the contract language, what do we have there that says how do we handle it when the hours are overrun? Do the consultant can just continue to run the hours, or do they need special written permission from anyone?
Well, maybe I can use some help on the actual contract issue there, but I think we like I said, we review the tasks, we review the hours spent bi-weekly. And so as we realized that we were about to run out of hours, and we estimate to be able to run out of hours by April, this is back in probably late January, we started to roll in a lot of these tasks. In other words, trying to get other staff to kind of help out, to kind of see if we can balance these projects and the hours without having to spend too much more of the contract hours. So we made an attempt at doing that. But in terms of the contract itself, maybe Heather, you can help me out.
Yeah, the contract provides that the contractor needs to receive written approval to exceed the not to exceed contract amount from the city. So the contract provides they can't exceed that amount and can't expect payment unless they've received prior written approval from the city.
So they did receive prior written approval from the city for all these extra hours?
Not here, I don't believe, no.
Okay. Thank you, Vice
They
Mayor.
didn't receive written permission for the
There was
overall?
a request to do the work, but there wasn't a written approval to exceed the amount, which would have had to go to council anyway.
Yeah, so let me jump in here. Yeah, great questions. I think Vice Mayor Chow, you and Councilmember Moore have been doing a very good job of asking questions, but I want to do a time check. Both you and Councilmember Moore have used up 5 minutes. In fact, I ceded over more than a minute of my time to you, Vice Mayor Chow. And so I do see that Councilmember Moore has her hand up, but Councilmember Willie also has her hand up. Vice Mayor Chow, I'm going to move on. I think, frankly, you're making great points and you're asking great questions, but let me go to Councilmember Willie so that he has an opportunity to ask questions before going through and asking for further questions from people who've already asked. So Councilmember Willie.
So my questions would be along the lines of Vice Mayor. So I'd like to see it over time for continuity and consistency rather than me trying to ask a very similar question. So you may want to go to Councilman Moore first before coming back to my ceded time to Vice Mayor Chow.
Okay, got it, Councilmember Wood. Councilmember Wade, did you have anything that you wanted to ask on this item? I might have a quick follow-up before I go to Councilmember Moore.
Not at this moment. Thank you, Mayor Paul.
Okay, sure. Okay, let me start my time again here. All right, so okay, so my question is actually a follow-up to Councilmember Vice Mayor Chow's question. So contractually, HDL is required to get written authorization to go over the hours, and yet there is a request to pay over those hours. And so, Madam City Attorney, what would be your advice with regard to the obligations of the public in this event? Because they haven't received the apparent, written requirement that they contracted for. What's your recommendation in this situation?
Well, here, this is a longtime contractor with the city. The city is in an emergency situation where a lot of work is needing to be done quickly, I think. And that here we could provide, the council can provide the written authorization to pay for the work that was completed. I don't think there was any doubt that it wasn't satisfactorily completed, and that this is, likely considered to be a good policy decision for the city to honor the work that was done. But that is at the city council's discretion. It's not required under the contract.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll go on to Councilmember Moore. And Councilmember Moore, well, I guess you're out of, let me go ahead and cede my time if you wanted to ask a follow-up question or two.
Yes, so I just want to clarify, did we pay through this contract $170 per hour to have masks delivered?
At the beginning. And then afterwards, she made arrangements for all the donated masks and public works folks. There was a small crew of public works folks that got it out to small businesses.
Okay, and I just want to point out that other cities have a $50,000 max contract amount that the city manager is allowed to create, and we have a much higher amount, this $175,000 amount, and we might want to revisit that.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember.
I have one more question on that, sorry. Are these contracts allowed to be recurring and renewed year after year? Or is it considered a one-time contract? Because this one looks like, unbeknownst to council, that we had our economic development manager become a contractor, and then have it renewed. We're in the second year, and for most of us, this was news. We didn't even know that this had happened. So is apparently somewhere baked in the policy, these contracts are allowed to be renewed without informing council?
Unless they exceed the contract, the total authorized expenditure amount. So up to $175,000, and then the renewal needs to come back to council.
And nothing in changing the organizational chart would be informed to council. Nothing.
The position wasn't eliminated from the city's employment roles. It was an unfilled, unbudgeted position. So it wasn't removed, and for the reason you see now, that it allows the city the flexibility to cease what I believe was considered to be a temporary arrangement with the contractor and now recruit for that unfilled position. So that didn't come to council because the position remained. It wasn't vacated.
Okay, well, let me, with my dying seconds here, get back in on this time. So just to clarify, if we wanted to change the policy on this, that would be council's prerogative, right?
Yes, and I believe that The administrative department is working on an update to the purchasing policy. As you saw, it's a fairly slim one. So
I'm
although it
talking
is
about the thresholds, the $175,000 amount.
yes, which is part of
the requirement to bid. I mean, all those are policy decisions that are within the scope of council's authorization to examine, correct?
right. That's what I meant, that would be coming back to council to update the purchasing policy, and you could change those thresholds at that time.
Okay. Okay, great. So I have a hand raised from Vice Mayor Chow, and Vice Mayor Chow, Councilmember Woolley has ceded time over, and so Vice Mayor Chow.
Hi. Although I think the contract should have been monitored more clearly, but Deb at that time did mention this to, I think, at least to me, at one-on-one, and this is what I'm going to do. I think Deb usually do that, and do I feel comfortable with that? And I didn't realize, I don't remember if it was voted by the council or not, but I was aware of this change. And I thought at that time it was, it makes sense to do. But I didn't realize that, okay, the total hours would be actually reduced from 1,300 to 941, with or without COVID. That's a big reduction. Yeah. So.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember and Vice Mayor Chow. I don't see any other hands raised at this point. So Councilmember Woolley, you have your hand raised. And I want to remind everyone, these are questions before we go to the public. I know it's very tempting to interject commentary, and Councilmember Woolley, if you have follow-on questions, you certainly have the bulk of your remaining time.
I think I'll wait. So thanks.
Okay.
I'll wait.
Thank you, Councilmember Woolley. So let's go to our members of the public. We have one member of the public with her hand raised, Peggy Griffin. And I want to remind everyone that if you have your hand raised by the conclusion of Peggy's comments, then I will call on you for public commentary. Peggy, welcome.
Thank you. City Council, staff, I'd like to thank City Manager for clarifying that this position will go in-house starting in July 2021. I strongly support that move. Also, it's been an unusual year, to say the least. Regardless of COVID, the city should have put controls in place to prevent overruns. If every contract overran, our city budget would be shot. So the things that concern me about this is the financial controls the city does not have in place. No one monitoring hours, total amounts, accepting invoices for amounts and hours exceeding contractual amounts, writing checks where checks should not have been written for $14,250 over the contracted maximum amount. Where is there a flag, an alert that stops this, that sends alerts several hours before a contract is exceeded? Many years I've been a contractor, and never have I ever submitted an invoice over the number of hours or the amount that was contracted. It just doesn't happen. You don't do that. How was this allowed to happen? Where are the controls to prevent it from happening in the future? Several of you city council members are concerned about our city being physically responsible. Put controls in place to prevent this from happening again. Put checks and balances in place. Take the time to look at the numbers and look at what happened so that you know where it needs to be fixed. I don't want to see this again. I'm asking you to put the financial controls in place to prevent this overage from occurring again. I'm asking the city formally to put HDL on notice that approvals must be obtained prior to future payments. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. Our next speaker is Lisa Warren. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you. So I felt like I should say something because I asked this item to be pulled before because it concerned me just briefly, and I needed to know more, and now I know more. And I echo the thanks to City Manager Deb to let us know that what I think was her plan initially to have this come back as an employee. So I'm glad that's happening. I hope you find someone soon. I'm happy to see and hear Peggy's list of things because we should all be concerned. And it's too bad that one thing has to highlight, but it certainly is a reminder that we've had issues in the past with employees. I'm not saying this was, but if there's tighter watch, we know that already. It's important because we got screwed before. So regardless of how innocent things should look, there really does need to be a tighter system. And I know there's a lot going on, but you're running basically a company when you're running a city. And I just agree with what Peggy said. I'm babbling. I will stop babbling. It's a waste of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. We'll take this back. And so per our normal procedure, I'd like to request a motion for further discussion. If there, Councilmember Way, you have your hand raised.
So moved.
What are you moving, Councilmember?
I move approval of the proposed amendment of an additional 4,800 for economic development staffing services through the fiscal year ending on June 30th, 2021.
And just to clarify, Councilmember Way, did you mean 48,000 or 40,000?
40,800.
Okay. Councilmember Willie, you have your hand raised. Did you want to second this for the purposes of discussion? And you'll need to unmute yourself, Councilmember Willie, if you'd like to be heard.
Sorry about that. I'm looking at the handout. No, I wanted to do a motion for the overage of 14,250.
Okay, well, we have a motion that was brought forth by Councilmember Way. It has not been seconded. We have a motion brought forward by Councilmember Willie for the overage amount. We have a hand raised from Councilmember Moore. Councilmember Moore, did you want to second one of the motions that have been put forth as a first?
Yes, I'd like to second Councilman Willie's motion. And I have some questions. Now that I'm looking at the municipal code, which was referenced in the purchasing policy chart we were given, it refers to contract amounts between $45,001 to $175,000. It says no bidding required, and then it references code section 3.22.070D and 3.23130A. 3.23.130A is for public works contracts, and this is not a public works contract. I'm looking at 3.22070D, and that is referring to the same services as the public works contract items in 3.23. So I would like the city attorney to look at this, because I'm not sure that the type of contract which was awarded if it's following the municipal code correctly. I would like to have some comments on that. Probably this needs to be researched, and then it comes back to council and we know the answer. But from what I'm reading, this portion of the table is regarding public works and not economic development.
Madam City Attorney, did you want to speak to that comment by Councilmember Moore?
Yeah, I can do an assessment and get back to council members. I don't, have all this in front of me right now. My guess is that those code sections say that bidding is required in certain instances for public works contracts and not for others. And the fact that the code doesn't require bidding for services contracts is what the purchasing policy is citing that for. But I can do an assessment and get back to you about that.
Right. Okay. Great. Because Chapter 3.23 is Public Works Contract and Bidding Procedures. This chapter is enacted to enhance competition, to prevent corruption and undue influence in the awarding of public works contracts.
I understand.
And like that.
Which
Okay.
sections you're
So I'm
citing.
not. So it actually makes me kind of reluctant for us to have a vote on this at this point without knowing if the contract itself was following our municipal code. I'm a little concerned about that now when I'm actually digging into the code being referenced in the table.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Moore. Just as an FYI for everyone, I've added a couple of extra minutes. Councilmember Moore, I ceded 30 seconds of my extra couple minutes to yourself on that. But just to do a quick time check, you've gone through the total of 7, but I'm sure we can be flexible about it. Councilmember Way didn't have any questions initially, and so she has her 7 minutes. Councilmember Willie, you have a total of 5:44. Vice Mayor, you have 2 minutes, and I have about a minute and a half. So Vice Mayor, and this is just bookkeeping for the sake of trying to be equitable here. Vice Mayor Chow, you do have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you for keeping all the time. It's really a big task.
Sure.
So I'm trying to understand, okay, HDL is a big company and they should be experienced in keeping track of their contract. It's their responsibility to not go over the amount that's contracted. Now they have gone over. What is the city's responsibility to pay? Do we have any legal responsibility to pay the amount that HDL?
No, per the terms of the contract, you're not required to pay for it.
They screwed up, right? And the consultant actually is on salary. She will be paid her salary, the amount probably some bonus anyway. So we are not really not paying any individual. This is a corporation.
Payment goes to the
Who
company.
screwed up? So why should Cupertino residents be paying for their screw up? That's my question. What, are we legally
rhetorical question.
Are we legally? I guess are we? So legally, we are not required to, right? Even if we say we don't pay that, it's legally we are just asserting our right under the contract.
You're not legally required.
Okay. Then I'd like to make a supplemental motion that I don't pay any.
Add one before you make that motion, Ms. Vice Mayor?
Yeah.
I just want, with all due respect, to add that while the city is perhaps not legally bound to pay for the overage because HDL did not ask for confirmation in writing, we did get services rendered all the way through the Tory purchase. Okay.
Yeah, I understand. And actually, I have no problem with how the contract was signed. I think Deb did notify, at least me, I assume that other council members too. But then I think, yes, they did render certain service beyond contract, but it's their own screw up. And I don't see why Cupertino residents have to supplement that amount.
Okay, Vice Mayor Chow, you wanted to bring another motion. I stopped your clock because you said you wanted to bring something forward procedurally. So what was your motion that you wanted to bring forward as a substitute motion?
So I would like to try a motion that we stop the contract and do not pay any extra beyond the contracted amount.
Okay, is there a second for Vice Mayor Chow's substitute motion? I'll go by hands here. And currently only Vice Mayor Chow's hand is up.
And we'll direct the city manager to treat this as if an employee have left the position and then try to manage until another employee is hired.
Councilmember Moore, your hand is up.
I'm looking for a clarification from Vice Mayor. So what would happen or perhaps the city manager could answer as well. So if we second this motion and we vote unanimously for it, what would be the net effect?
The net effect dollars-wise? Or
Well, what happens? So what are we doing? We're deciding that we're not going to pay them anything, and the contract stopped, and we're done, and then we look for a new hire. Is that right?
well, either way, we're looking for a new hire. So that's not affected by this particular action. It will take me several months probably to get somebody on board for this particular position. What I believe the Vice Mayor's motion is to just pay up to the limit of the contract and not pay the $14,000 and some change that's indicated in the staff report and in the presentation. What repercussions that has, I don't know. We did receive services rendered for that, and I do understand Vice Mayor's position. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
And Councilmember Moore, are you seconding Vice Mayor Chow's motion?
This would be we already have Councilman Willie's motion to pay the $14,000, right? And that one's seconded. So this is going to be a substitute motion that we would vote on first, and then we go back to Councilman Willie's, correct?
Well, if it doesn't pass, yes.
Okay, so I second it.
Okay, there is a substitute motion and a second for the substitute motion. I just want to make some brief comments here before we have a further discussion on substitute motion. I think we need to examine our policy with regard to procurement. And while I think it's appreciated on some level that staff has gone forward to do that, I think that it would make more policy sense for staff to ask council and the public what their concerns are and how that would be that set of concerns would be reflected, and how we perhaps modify this procurement policy prior to our staff essentially unilaterally going forward and making modifications to that policy. So I would have preferred a process where we're getting that kind of input prior to any kind of proposal being placed in front of us. I think that comparing to peer jurisdictions as to thresholds makes a lot of sense. I know that in my time on council, those thresholds were raised. I don't have specific recollection as to the reason or precisely when and what the prior amounts were, but it would be great to see that history in front of us as we're considering this going forward. I'm also really concerned with regard to how this contract ended up getting tracked and paid out. It looks like a relatively minor amount has been paid on the contract, but all of a sudden we're now being asked to foot a bill that I think if the number is right in my mind, it was something like 130,000 remained, but then there was 14,000 on top of it, and then suddenly we have this just enormous bill relative to the overall amount of the contract. And I appreciate the calmness of the answers, but I don't really understand why we weren't tracking along the way, and why in July, August, September, October, November, December, we aren't seeing the diminishment of this bucket of $175,000 and thinking to ourselves, well, what happens? I think there is clearly a gap here that isn't being set forth very clearly to council and the public as to how these billings were conducted and how they were being overseen. So I completely agree with members of the council and public that express concerns with that. Those questions, frankly, have not been answered very clearly. So those are my comments on it. I do support the substitute motion. I think that this should be an in-house position. I think we need a lot of clarity on economic development. And I think the sooner we fill the position, the better. But I think staff should be advised that more transparency is better than less. And that's, to me, very clear in the tenor of our conversation here this evening. So Councilmember Willie, I see your hand is raised, followed by Councilmember Moore.
Yeah, so I'll just make a couple comments. And so I believe as a city, we need to be held in good regard by our community, but also by our suppliers. And so I do think, we should be compensating people that have provided services for the city. But I'll also go on to say that, when I hear that, somehow some council heard that a actual position was now going to be a contracted out, I don't remember ever having that brought to me. It's possible I'm wrong, but I don't believe I remember ever hearing that. I'm not necessarily feeling that we on the council have to be a part of that. I would be supportive if at that time when an employee wanted to go outside and be a contract, revolving door possibly type consideration, no waiting type of consideration, things that out in industry, those are pretty standard to ensure that things are kept above board. And so if when that was going to happen, and if at the time a replacement wasn't easily obtainable, if the city manager were to go to the mayor, which would have been prior to Mayor Paul, it would have been Mayor Shar, and if she were to tell us that she actually did go and get confirmation from Mayor Shar, that would ease my concern to some degree. But I do think that now that we're into this for 2 years without some type of city action to get that position filled, by all means, yep, COVID and all these other considerations, but at least an attempt to post the opening and screen candidates. And if nobody came, well, then we on the council could say, okay, let's go ahead and keep this open. So, I just have that kind of concern, but I do think we should be compensating them for the work that was done and remain in good light by our suppliers, and I believe our community will agree. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Willie. And there are hands, Councilmember Willie, you have a little under 3 minutes total left. Councilmember Way, your hand is raised. You have your fresh 7 minutes, followed by Vice Mayor Chow.
Thank you, Mayor Paul. Okay, so I wasn't on council when this 175 was designated. I feel this is our internal policy. We're going to review it anyway. I think the staff said they're going to come back and review it. I do listen. I listen to why, this particular contractor was contracted, because she used to work for our city part-time, I believe. And then when she went to another company, we needed an economic director. So it looks like it's a natural process, but maybe we have some issues with that. But I think this is our internal. We can clean up our policies. We are in a very challenging COVID situation. We have to take that into consideration, and we need economic directors. I mean, they do. She does quite a bit of things, and I know that's invaluable that we need it until June 30th. So I really have an issues to stop the contract and not paying them because, it is service rendered, and I believe our staff gave her, the economic director, the jobs. So maybe there's some internal procedures that needs to be cleaned up. I think that's our city's, that's our prerogative, but to treat this current contract and not pay is how much, I don't know, a little bit over $12,000 maybe. Or have an economic director that we don't have one until we have a hire one. And Deb did say it's gonna take a couple months to hire someone. We are in a very challenging time. And I believe, we can ask the staff, do we need an economic director until we hire a new one? And I would like to listen to the staff's comments. And I feel that this is a challenging time and we need to really take that into consideration. And our procedures, policies, we can clean it up, actually. That would be my comment.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Wei. You have roughly 5 minutes left. So Councilmember Moore, your hand is raised. Councilmember Chow as well. Councilmember Chow, you have some time left. Before we go to either Councilmember Willie or Councilmember Wei, see if they'd be willing to cede time over. Let me go to Councilmember Chow. Yeah, you have approximately 40 seconds of your,
Okay.
yeah,
I'll give her some time.
okay.
It's okay. The overage is about 7% of the contracted amount. And then without seeing the number of hours that's spent on each task, I don't even know what all those hours are spent for. So if we are paying, I would like to see an audit of all the hours and the services rendered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember and Vice Mayor Chow. Councilmember Moore, let me see if either Councilmember Wei or Councilmember Willie will cede you over some time to.
Sure, I'm fine.
I see head nods and vocalization. Thank you. Councilmember Moore.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Wei. So going back to what's in this, the table we were given, I would like this provided to the public, this written information. And going back to the Municipal Code, Chapter 3.22, I really do want to hear get some information back on that, because my reading of this is that it would need to have gone out and be bid. When I'm looking at the budget for economic development, and there is some significant disparities, but they're showing $89,810 for the 2019 actual, and the budget for 2022 $337,074. But if I look in the other section of the budget, it shows for economic development the actual for 2019 of $175,272, and then proposed budget got moved over. Additionally, in here, we have another issue, which is city manager discretionary spending. It was $743 for 2020, yet the 2022 proposed budget discretionary spending is $593,250, and it states that the contingency budget for the city manager requires the city manager approval. So that to me is not a good set of checks and balances, and especially when I'm going to assume that would include contracts, up to $175,000. So the way this is written, almost now $600,000 can be spent and approved by the city manager on their own. And so I'm concerned about that. Whatever policy is regulating that, I don't see it anywhere. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Moore. I don't see hands raised. Councilmember Wei or Willie, may I use some of your time?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. I have a question for staff. So let me share screen to see if I can get. Okay, so this is from the staff presentation. Well, maybe I need to maximize this. Can you see the PDF up here? I'm really wondering, so are you looking at a PDF that states as of March 31st, 2021?
Yes.
Yes, okay, great. So I'm just wondering, how did this happen where only 281 hours and $47,000 in some extra have been paid? We're sitting in May, the 11th month of the fiscal year, And if you add up 137 and 141, that gets you to 278 hours. So basically, why are we sitting in the 10th month of the fiscal year with only just a little bit over the first 2 months of the fiscal year's worth of contracts paid? I mean, that's what I was referring to. I mean, when did all this get billed? I mean, are we not paying the contract as we go along on a monthly basis?
No, Mr. Mayor, if I may. The way HDL does, sorry, am I coming across okay?
Yes, I can.
Yeah.
Okay, great. The way HDL sends invoice, I believe they do it 3 months at a time, and that's how we would get those bills. So I can only speak to the latest round of invoice that we received because we knew we're coming up short on these hours that we did not authorize to pay those yet. The latest round invoices, the prior rounds, I'm not sure. I know that we authorized for those payment for the summer and the fall payments.
Okay, see, that's even more alarming. We're in the middle of the fourth quarter, and so it doesn't even seem like the entirety of the first quarter has been paid. I really, you know, I tend to agree with Councilmember Willie. If something's been billed and the work has been done, we should pay it. But at the same time, to me, this just looks so irregular. And you know, frankly, you know, with all respect, Director Fu, that gives me no clarity at all as to why we're 2 quarters later and only a portion of that first quarter has been paid. And now we're being asked, okay, and so if you look at this amount not paid as 126,000 and then some out of a $170,000 contract, and then we're being asked to add $14,000 on top of that. You know, a very simple forward question that's been asked, how did this happen? It simply isn't being answered to any degree. So that's where my concern is. I mean, I understand and value the work that, you know, has been set forth. I think, you know, there are some things that we can be doing to examine economic development. That's a different question. But I mean, how did this logistically happen is an open question. I'll just wrap up by saying I'm somewhere between let's pay this off and let's pay this off plus the extra 14,000. But the answer to the question that I'm asking right now is actually quite crucial as to where you sit, because we don't have the details. When were these bills put forward? Why didn't they get paid? Why is there like an enormous chunk plus another 14,000 that council is looking at for the first time in the 11th month of this fiscal year? And we're being asked on behalf of the public to pay this out, you know, probably more than 70% of the contract plus, you know, and then some without getting these full details. Depending on how this happened, is this an HDL issue? Is this internal staffing? I mean, obviously this is not something that was, you know, a well, you know, calibrated type of process. And we need answers with regard to how we set forth our decision-making process. I think at the very least, we could say, okay, you know, the contract is for a certain amount. We'll go ahead and go up to that amount. But my tendency is to support the motion on the table. And if we could get more information as to the logistics of how this happened, because there are a lot of gaps that are being provided here. And I will say also, you know, this is an ongoing issue. I would really like to see presentations before the day of the meetings. And this is precisely why, if you align the substance of what's being recommended in the presentation here with what's being provided to the public in the staff report and in the materials, they're very different. The suggestion that we pay the overage only does not appear in the staff report, as the city manager indicated. It only appears in the presentation. And when the presentation gets set forth, it does provide some more information, but it doesn't provide all the information. So, you know, I want everything to be copacetic and friendly, but realizing our role on council here is vis-a-vis the public and vis-a-vis our staff. You know, we're here to provide oversight. I think we should be provided the benefit of the information in order to apply that oversight. And so when we talk about looking at our system and revamping it, we need to be asked, when we have an agenda and it says authorized, it should be considered for authorization. This is a mantra I've been repeating over and over and over for the 7th year now. And so I really hope people take this to heart and recognize what we're trying to communicate here. I'm okay to—
So may I attempt to answer part of your questions, Mr. Mayor?
Please, Madam City Manager.
So part of the issue, it was not even an issue. Part of the way that part of this issue is the way HDL bills. HDL bills 1 quarter in arrears. So services are rendered and they bill in arrears for 3 months. So the $126,000 approximately that are shown on that slide has the October through December bill unpaid, and I am told, and maybe someone from finance can report with more information, that the invoice was submitted for payment and just not paid through the portal, and I don't know the name of the portal. So then comes the quarter ending March, so that would be January, February, March, and that's when we realized there was an overage, and so that's when did not get paid because there's an overage.
Right, and if we're presented with this prior to having an overage and this massive amount of the contract to, the public eye not even being paid, then perhaps we say half a year in advance, maybe you internally or whichever department has this should be tracking the time closer to real time. So now we're 9 months behind and we're over the number of hours, but this hasn't been a progression, and it falls upon our internal mechanisms in order to inform us as to where this contract is tracking. So I think this is a lesson learned, but I mean, with regard to a 3-month arrearage, I mean, that, frankly, Madam City Manager, I don't know where that leaves us with regard to the calendar arc, if you will, that we're looking at here. It really doesn't fit that particularly well.
I'm just stating how the contractor built.
Understood. Councilmember Moore, your hand is raised.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Paul. I have a question for the city attorney. Are invoices from HDL, are those attorney-client privilege, or is that something that can be spoken about?
Those aren't privileged.
They're not?
No.
Okay. So I have a few HDL companies invoices. One for July 31st, 2020, due August 30th, 2020. Economic development for $5,000. Insight Market Analytics, Economic Development Staffing Services, $23,290, a total of $28,290. The next invoice, and I don't know if I have all of them, the next invoice is September 30th, 2020, due October 30th, 2020 for $47,770. The next one is 11/30/2020, the invoice date, due date 12/30/2020. Economic development charges total $47,840. The next one, invoice date December 31st, 2020, due date January 30th, 2021. Economic development services $17,000. So these bills they don't appear to be quarterly.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Moore.
Maybe they're batched quarterly. Perhaps we could get someone from like Christina or Zach. Can you help me out here with some of the information on the invoicing?
Sure, Mr. Mayor, if I may. As far as the billing goes for HDL and specifically for economic development, there are invoices that are billed on a quarterly basis, but as Councilmember Moore had pointed out, I believe there are invoices that are also for either 1 month or for 2 months. So the billing and the invoices that are received from the city, or received by the city from HDL, are a bit irregular over the course of a fiscal year in terms of the cycle, whether it's quarterly or on a monthly basis.
Okay.
Mayor Paul? Thank you. So with HDL, they do something with our transient occupancy tax, and there's a separate contract there, and it might be that they're collecting that money and it's done quarterly. But this particular, the economic development contract, the way these bills are showing up is that it looks like they probably are doing monthly billing. So what I would suggest is that that the total that we have in the staff report needs to be updated. That it might not be the correct total.
Okay, Councilmember Wei, followed by Vice Mayor Chow.
Thank you, Mayor Paul. I'm going to be really brief. I think we're here talking about a lot of things that's internal, and I just feel that we need to work on those later, and the staff knows where to work on. We really need to resolve this billing thing, and I just think if their service is rendered, I feel that we need to pay them. Maybe this is a city attorney's question. You know, we're talking about $14,000 that extra hours, whether we like it or not. I'm pretty sure the staff might have authorized it. So I'm wondering if that gives our city liability so that we're not paying a bill that's service rendered. As for all the questions to staff, finance, how this billed, if we knew these questions already, we have agenda review. I think we should give it to the staff so that they can prepare to answer it. I prepare all my questions during agenda review. Actually, I emailed a day or 2 days before so that they can do research and bring us answers so that they're not put on the spot because they don't remember things. I know this is all internal, so I really sincerely hope that our council would at least pay the bill so that we're not being, criticized of, work performed, not paid. And again, I want to emphasize we're in a COVID situation, recovery situation. We do need economic director, maybe, so we maybe can go hire one really fast. And city manager says, it takes time for this person to get on board. And so I just hope that our council would consider it is service rendered and our staff probably authorized the service, and I'm hoping that we can at least pay the bill, or and the attorney might be able to say, what if we don't pay it? Are we having any legal liabilities? And I feel it's internally, I think we can clean up a lot of protocols and a lot of policies. But if we ask questions ahead of time, we might get better answers. So that's my point. I'm hoping that we can pay the bill and move on and hire a economic, maybe full-time, maybe part-time. I don't know what city manager feels that we need, but we need someone to work on economic recovery. So I just feel that we should pay the bill, let the contract finish, and then, at the same time, hire, go out and hire economic director to work on our city's issues. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Wei. Vice Mayor Chow, your hand is, and all our time is exhausted at this point. So just brief wrap-up comments because there are two motions on the table. There's a substitute motion to pay up to the amount of the contract, and the original motion to pay the overage as well. So Vice Mayor Chow.
So for this situation to happen, both parties bear responsibilities, not just the city staff, HDL too. So their contract, they used up 770 hours by the end of December, and that's 81% of the contracted hours. They should have alerted themselves and contacted the city to try and increase the hours, but they didn't. That's their responsibility. And now we don't want to pay the hours over the contracted amount. If they disagree, they can come and justify that amount. So I think the city attorney has made it clear, legally, we don't have any obligation to pay any amount that's over the contracted amount. That's why we have a contract. And then if they think we should pay, they should come and justify that. But in the end, it's a lesson learned for them too. They didn't manage the contract well in the first place. They didn't alert the city when the hours are overrun by 80%. 80% is used at 50% of the time. So they have a responsibility. They shouldn't be.
All right, Vice Mayor Chow, briefly wrap up comments, please. I think we've heard your point. It's been reiterated. I happen to agree with it, but let's move on for wrap-ups. Councilmember Moore, you did have your hand raised. Did you want to wrap up with some comments, or are you okay with voting on the substitute motion?
Well, yeah, I'm okay with voting on that, but I'm concerned that we're saying that these processes need to be put in place and that we might not ever see them come back. I mean, there have been things that we have asked for that took 2 years for them to return, and I think this is very important, and I don't think it's something that needs to be put on a work plan per se, where we've got to, each vote on it and give it a number and get it to the top. I think that this should be at the top. This definitely needs to be worked on. So I'm really concerned about that these ideas that we've got here never come back to us. And with this contract, it was initiated at the end of July, so you're talking August, September, October, November, December. You've got 5 months only, and that much went through. I'm frankly surprised that this company had this issue.
Okay, thank you. So these are my wrap-up comments on the substitute motion. If this motion passes, the overage I'm willing to entertain in the future if this motion passes, but I want to know when these bills were when these invoices were rendered, precisely when. Were they sent over by snail mail? Were they emailed? And I want to know when they're received and when these initial ones were paid. I really think it's very important to get those details in order to better assess the equities behind the overage amounts. So with all respect, perhaps the work was done. Let's just see how the work was billed. I think the details matter quite a bit. So Councilmember Willie, you have your hand raised as well. Wrap-up comments before we vote on the substitute motion.
Yeah, a real important wrap-up comments, because making a vote without, the community understanding where my vote came from. I had said, let's pay the additional $14,250, which I believe is the right thing to do. With all these unanswered questions, and with HDL having the full ability to come to the council meeting, and by that I don't think it should be Angela. I think it should be somebody higher up at HDL to explain to us and answer our questions. I have to go along with, if we vote on the substitute motion first, which only pays the original contract amount, I am comfortable doing that, and they can come back and ask for the overage and help explain, and also staff can help explain, so that then we know how we're spending the community's money. So that's how I'll have to vote. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Councilmember Willie. Vice Mayor Chow, I note that you've already been given your opportunity to do wrap-up comments prior to voting on the substitute. I'm sorry?
As an amendment to the motion.
Okay, so you'd like to...
Into the city manager.
No, I'm sorry. Can you repeat what you just said?
I add amendment to the motion with the direction to city manager to come back with maybe proposal on future how to have more monitor in contracting overall contracting hours.
Someone remind me who made the substitute motion here and who seconded it.
Chow made the substitute motion and Moore seconded it.
Okay, Councilmember Moore, will you accept that as an amendment to the substitute motion on the table?
Oh, sure. Yes.
Okay, to have the city manager come back with recommendations as to how I don't want to put words in your mouth, Vice Mayor Chow. So summarize.
Better monitoring of contracting hours. Is that? Councilmember Moore, do you have a better language?
Well, I'm not sure that I think I might want to hear something from the city attorney with regards to that topic as well. because when I'm,
From both city
as I,
attorney and clarify the contracting question from Councilmember Moore.
thank you. Yes, right. And that had to deal with the table that we have, which is referencing the municipal code. And I'm not entirely sure that it was interpreted correctly. So I wanted to have that double checked.
Okay, okay. So let me understand, Vice Mayor Chow, what is it that you're asking for from staff? Are you asking for the city manager to come back, the city attorney, as well as the city manager to come back? So just to be specific about your amendment.
Yeah, so direction to the city manager to come back with clarification or revision of the better monitoring of contracting hours. And the city attorney to come back with clarification to Councilmember Moore's question on the, I'm not exactly sure. Yeah, I think you know.
The process for authorizing professional services contracts.
Okay, so we want more clarity as to what can be done to better track hours for existing contracts, and from the city attorney, clarification as to of the formalized process or recommendations for the formalized process for procuring these types of employment or these types of contracts, I should say.
Yeah.
Okay, Councilmember Wei, you have your hand up.
I just have a brief comment. I really think this should be two motions. We are mixing things together. And second, this is really our internal processing. I really feel we should make it clean, pay the extra service, discontinue the contract, and work on internal thing. I just don't feel that for 14,000 and change that we want another company to come back and go after us. If we can get a cleaner motion, paid it off and like follow up with Councilmember Willie's, just, what we need to pay, and then work on our internal process.
Okay, well, Councilmember Wei, thank you. I'm going to take that as a request to bifurcate the substitute motion. And let me ask if we can do that to the city attorney. Can a substitute motion be bifurcated in that manner, Madam City Attorney?
If the mover and the seconder agree to it as a friendly amendment.
Okay, so what exactly is that? Is that just a pair of substitute motions to substitute the motion that was initially on the floor? Or would it be a substitute motion plus an extra collateral? That's not a term of art. Another motion placed on the floor as well.
It is an amendment to bifurcate the motion into two motions, but I would still consider those to be heard at the same time. Like,
okay, well, maybe there is a term for it formally, but let's since we have your blessing, let me go and ask Councilmember Chow, Vice Mayor Chow, would you be willing to bifurcate the motion between what you and Councilmember Moore were suggesting as follow-up direction to staff on the one hand, with the second part of your substitute motion, and now the second motion, if accepted, and the initial substitute motion, which was to pay off the remainder of the contract. Would you be willing to bifurcate?
Yeah, we can just vote separately.
Okay, and Councilmember Moore, are you willing to do so as well?
Yes.
Okay, I don't see any other hands raised. Madam City Clerk, will you please conduct a roll call vote on the first part of the substitute motion, which is dealing with the monetary aspect, the payment of the remainder of the contract?
Councilmember Moore?
Aye.
Councilmember Wei?
Aye.
Councilmember Willie?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Chow?
Aye.
Mayor Paul?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
And Madam City Clerk, if you would please conduct a roll call vote on the other part of the substituted motion, which is a motion to provide direction to staff, namely our city manager and city attorney, to follow up on the items thus articulated.
Councilmember Moore?
Aye.
Councilmember Wei?
Aye.
Councilmember Willie?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Chow?
Aye.
Mayor Paul?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, so we are on to our next item on the agenda. I see that it is approximately 10 o'clock. We're going into a tranche of items that are budget related. And so items 16 through 18, they are fiscal or budget related. Let's take a brief 5-minute break, well, a 5-minute break, and we'll reconvene at 10:07 prior to going into item number 16, which will be the third quarter financial report, followed by the study session for the budget, as well as a recommendation from Parks and Rec relating to grants under the
Could
budget.
I just kind of toss out,
Yes, Councilmember Worley.
yeah, being that it's already 10 o'clock and we know from the past, budgets are not short. I think we should really consider what can we get done by whatever quitting time we're going to attempt to be. If we don't do that now, I have a feeling, we're talking 1 o'clock in the morning.
If we're assiduous as to the estimated times, we should adjourn right at midnight, or at least we should conclude with the last item at midnight. So let's be optimistic about it, and I'll do my best to keep us on track as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. We'll see you in 5 minutes at 10:08. Council back again. This is item number 16. Item number 16 is related to our third quarter financials. Let me see if I can pull this. Okay, so the subject is consideration of accepting the third quarter financial report for fiscal year 20 to 21 and our city work program and key project update, et cetera, as delineated on our agenda. I see that members of our administrative services department are here. Madam City Manager, would you like to introduce those members of your staff for the presentation? Or if not, Director Alfaro, as well as members of your department, please proceed.
Thank you, Mayor Paul, and good evening, Mayor Paul and City Council members. Christina Alfaro, Director of Administrative Services. With me this evening, I have Zach Korach, the city's finance manager, and Thomas Leung, Senior Management Analyst with the Administrative Services Department. And this evening, they will be presenting the third quarter financial report. With that introduction, I'll go ahead and hand you over to Zach, who will take you over the reporting cycle, the amended budget to date, and give you an update on our general fund.
Thank you, Christina. So we're going to be going over the budget reporting cycle, the amended budget as of quarter end, March 31st, 2021. We'll be discussing the general fund update, the various recommended budget adjustments, and then the final council recommendations for city council consideration, the next steps in transparency and engagement. So as far as the budget reporting cycle is concerned, I won't go through each and every one of these, but we are in fact at the third quarter in May of 2021. And later this evening, we'll be getting into the proposed budget study session. So as of March 31st, 2021, the city's total amended budget was $241 million. We started off the budget process with a proposed budget of $113.8 million. With budget reduction strategies that were recommended and approved by City Council, the final adopted budget came in at $110.6 million. Subsequently, there were $130.4 million in budget adjustments, and we'll be discussing those in more detail on this slide. So here we have a comprehensive reconciliation, starting with, on the far left, the fiscal year 2021 adopted budget broken out by fund. We see the $110.6 million for the total of all funds adopted. Then we move over to the right into the carryovers. These are carryovers of appropriations from the previous fiscal year that have yet to be spent, but the city still intends to spend those in the subsequent year. And again, those appropriations are carried over. In the general fund, the majority of the $27 million pertains to Valco Town Center and approximately $22 million in outstanding appropriations for those contracts. Special revenue funds include approximately $8 million for Lawrence Mitty Park. They also include a variety of transportation projects for street pavement maintenance. Capital projects funds, of course, represent $35 million worth of uncompleted capital improvement program projects. When we move over to the right and look at the encumbrances, these are any outstanding appropriations that are carried over but pertain to an outstanding purchase order or contract. In the general fund and on an annual basis, approximately $3 million, and it ranges up to upwards of $5 million will be carried over due to outstanding encumbrances. Moving over to the right, adjustments approved by City Council during the first through the third quarter. $11 million in the general fund, $4.5 million pertains to the property acquisition on Torrey. An additional $5 million was approved by City Council as part of the mid-year financial report. It was a $5 million transfer from the general fund to the capital reserve. The majority of the council approved adjustments comes in the debt service fund, $27.5 million. This pertains directly to the certificates of participation refinancing that was completed during the fall of 2020. The slide before you looks at general fund revenues and expenditures and compares where the city is and where the general fund is as of third quarter in respect to the previous 3 fiscal years. You'll notice that on the revenue side, we are tracking seemingly low at 59%. The reason being is the actual revenues as of third quarter are in respect to the amended budget. And within the amended budget and the estimated revenues is the revenues that are tied to the Valco Town Center, approximately $30 million worth of revenues that will be recognized over multiple years. When we pull out that one time, or we pull out that item, the $30 million, the adjusted tracking percentage is actually closer to 79%, which would be the highest tracking point over the last 3 fiscal years. On the expenditure side, 52%, but on an adjusted basis and pulling out or not considering the $20 million that is outstanding for the Valco Town Center contracts, we would be closer to 63%, and on the lower side in the respect to the 3 previous fiscal years. Here we have a look at the general fund revenues and its performance year over year as of third quarter. I won't go through each and every one of these. They are described in more detail within the staff report. I'll cover a few of the larger items. Sales tax. Sales tax has increased year over year by $6 million, or 26%. This is directly attributable to COVID-19 and the pandemic. The resulting shelter-in-place orders, the increased demand in computer and electronic products, the conversion to a telework environment statewide. These were all factors that increased online sales and had directly benefited the city from a sales tax revenue standpoint. Property tax remains to be one of the city's more stable revenue sources, increasing year over year by $1.3 million or 8%. We look at transient occupancy tax, clearly has been devastated as a result of COVID-19 and the halting of business travel, currently tracking at $1.25 million, and that would represent a decrease of 80% year over year. The last one I'll focus on is almost near the bottom, transfers in. We are seeing a significant decline year over year of approximately $9.5 million, and that is due to a transfer that Council had approved as part of the previous fiscal year's mid-year financial report. It was recommended and Council approved a transfer of $20 million to the capital reserve. Immediately following, COVID-19 took hold, and out of an abundance of caution, again, staff recommended and Council approved that $10 million of that transfer be brought back from the capital reserve to the general fund. We see that $10 million here. Of course, that did not take place in the subsequent and current fiscal year, and we see that variance as such. In total, a decrease in revenues over last year by $7.7 million or 10%, But when we factor in that one-time anomaly of the $10 million transfer, we're actually tracking at a higher pace than we were last year. On the other side, looking at general fund expenditures, employee compensation and benefits increasing year over year, approximately $1 million. This is aligned with historical trends and is driven by cost of living adjustments, step increases, as well as increases in CalPERS retirement costs and health rate increases. Materials and contract services, we are seeing relatively significant declines in those spending trends, and that would be a result of the budget reduction strategies that were incorporated in the fiscal year 2021 adopted budget. Lastly, in looking at the transfers outline, we are seeing a significant decrease in those expenditures of $15 million. And again, this is attributable to that $20 million transfer out that went to the capital reserve. $10 million was brought back as part of fiscal year 1920. As part of the mid-year financial report in the current fiscal year, City Council did approve a general fund transfer of $5 million to the capital reserve. 20 minus 5, we see that $15 million variance. We'll look at general fund balance. I want to start with the adopted budget, the third column here for the current fiscal year 2021, and really focusing on the last two rows, unassigned fund balance and total fund balance. At this same time last year, there was still great uncertainty surrounding COVID-19 and its future impacts on the city's revenue sources. As such, unassigned as well as total fund balance, but particularly unassigned fund balance was conservatively estimated. And that was a direct result of the reduction, or the anticipated at that time, reduction in revenues. Shortly after budget adoption, the city closed its books and completed the fiscal year for 2019-20. And we can see those actual fund balance results in the second column. We see that in reality, the city had experienced positive trends in its revenues, albeit TOT experienced significant declines immediately. There were far greater and offsetting increases from sales tax. And as a result, the unassigned fund balance within the general fund came in at $34.4 million and ended with a total fund balance in the general fund of $74.5 million. Looking over to the far right column, we look at the third quarter year-end projection for the current fiscal year. We are anticipating adding on an additional $5 million of unassigned fund balance, while also contributing additional dollars to the city's Section 115 trust. We see that $4 million increase in the restricted classification. And those two together result in the increase to total fund balance of approximately $9 million. With that, I will turn it over to our Senior Management Analyst, Thomas Leung, and he will be discussing the adjustments by department.
Thank you, Zach. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Tonight, I'll talk about budget adjustments and retirement costs. Let's start with Administrative Services. Administrative Services is requesting $136,000 because unemployment benefit costs have increased due to COVID-19. In the Parks and Recreation Department, they are requesting $547,313 for the tennis program. The department originally reduced the budget for the tennis program due to COVID-19. But since tennis programs were able to continue safely during the pandemic, revenues have ended up exceeding initial estimates. These expenses will be offset by approximately $646,000 in revenues, increasing fund balance by $98,000. The Public Works Department is requesting $73,235 in budget adjustments. This includes $23,000 for telephone and data services, $39,000 for environmental monitoring for the McClellan West parking lot improvement project, and $11,242 for claim and repair costs for a vehicle accident. Staff also requests to transfer $30,913 from various city funds to the Environmental Management Clean Creek Special Revenue Fund. The transfer is for storm drain fees that apply to city properties. In non-departmental, we have $30,913 in expense adjustments for the storm drain fee transfer. We also would like to adjust revenues by $4 million because of increased sales tax. Strong performance in the business-to-business industry and county pool allocations have increased our sales tax revenues. Adjusting the revenues will better align the budget with current year-end projections. We also expect $4.8 million in revenues from the American Rescue Plan Act. The American Rescue Plan Act is a stimulus package that will include assistance to help local governments offset revenue shortfalls and also offset costs related to COVID-19. On this slide, we have transfers of $535,258 between department and non-departmental accounts. The transfers will reimburse department budgets for COVID-19 purchases. There is no overall effect to fund balance here. Now that we've gone through the budget adjustments, let's talk about retirement costs. So why do retirement costs matter? Increases in pension rates are one of the drivers of the city's expense growth, and also many of our pension rates are outside the city's control. As indicated in this slide, the pension plan, also known as CalPERS, funds retirement benefits with a combination of investment earnings, employer contributions, and employee contributions. Currently, CalPERS uses a discount rate of 7%, so it assumes that investment returns are 7%. Suppose that the pension plan earns investment returns below that assumption. In that case, as the red arrows show, the city's contributions need to increase to make up for the shortfall. So why are pension costs currently going up? One, CalPERS investment returns have been lower than expected in several years. For example, last year, in fiscal year 2019-20, CalPERS earned an investment return of 4.7%. This increases the city's pension costs by up to $300,000 per year for over 15 years. In addition, CalPERS lowered the discount rate in 2016, which also increased the city's pension costs. And finally, in 2018, CalPERS revised its actuarial assumptions, which also increased the city's pension costs. So some of the questions that we wonder are, what if CalPERS investment returns continue to fall below 7%? What if CalPERS lowers the discount rate again? The point is that pension costs have increased in recent years, and there is a risk that they may increase again. And so now that we've learned about the risk of pension cost increases, I'll discuss the city's plan to reduce that risk. In 2018, the city implemented a Section 115 trust. A Section 115 trust is a fund that allows the city to invest money and pay in advance or fund future pension costs. The benefits of a Section 115 trust are it can earn higher returns than a general fund. It gives the city local control, and it also diversifies the city's assets. Our plan calls for using this Section 115 trust to fund the difference between a 6.25% discount rate and the 7% discount rate that's used by CalPERS. With this strategy, the city will be prepared if CalPERS earns less than 7% or if CalPERS lowers the discount rate. In short, we're using the Section 115 trust to invest funds, and then we allow the funds to grow long-term, and then we can use those funds when pension costs increase. For example, if CalPERS lowers the discount rate or earns less than 7%. So how do we implement the Section 115 trust? In 2018, we recommended $8 million in initial funding, along with additional contributions of $2 million per year over the first 5 years. So far, we've contributed $12 million, but we're also recommending a contribution of $2 million in this year's third quarter report. If we approve this $2 million contribution, the fund will now have a balance of $17.5 million. This will allow the city to be on schedule to address this pension funding gap and fund that difference between a 6.25 and 7% discount rate. What is the current status of the city's pension plan? Our current funded status is 66.9%. In other words, we have 66.9 cents in assets for every dollar in liabilities. But if we do factor in our Section 115 trust fund and also the 2 million contribution at third quarter, our funded status would be around 78.5%. So we can see that with our Section 115 trust, we are in a strong position to withstand pension cost increases. And on this slide, we have our recommendations. The third quarter financial report shows that the city is well positioned to move forward, despite significant impacts from COVID-19. Staff recommends accepting the city manager's third quarter financial report. Staff also recommends approving budget adjustments, including appropriations of $787,279 and revenues of $9.5 million. And staff also recommends approving a $2 million contribution from the general fund to the 115 trust. And so let's talk about what's coming up next in our budget cycle. So for fiscal year 2022, we have a proposed budget study session later tonight. We also have our final budget hearing and adoption on June 15th, and our first quarter financial report on November 16th. And finally, on this last slide, we have a link and QR code to access our interactive financial report on OpenGov. We look forward to hearing your questions and comments. Thank you.
Okay, great. Trying to keep everyone on track here. We're a few minutes off on the estimated time for this presentation. So I don't see any hands, however, raised from our council. I do have one from Councilmember Willie at this point. And so we're allocating approximately half an hour for this item. And so if we could make our questions succinct, that would be much appreciated. Councilmember Willie.
Yeah, so this is just a question on this last one. I think I understand, but I'm not sure that the community understands. But maybe I'm not quite right. The Section 115 trust, maybe he could put that slide back up, the 17.5 million, 6.25%. Thomas? So the question that I have is, if I'm understanding it right, you want to take $2 million from the general fund and put it into a Section 115 that you'll be investing, and it sounds good, and I think you're going to be doing a good job, but if that $2 million had stayed in the general fund would have been in an investment account anyway, and that return on that $2 million would have then gone to the general fund. I think I'm correct in that, but if you could clarify, because otherwise I think this might be some black magic that the community might not understand, that you're taking money from the general fund, putting it in a special investment fund that will be dedicated for the retirement obligation. Am I correct?
Yes, that is correct. And
Okay.
so due to regulations, the Section 115 trust has more flexibility around the investments that it can hold. And because of that, the Section 115 trust can typically earn higher returns than just keeping it in the general fund. So definitely some cities choose to build up a pension reserve in a general fund, but typically those will earn lower returns.
So maybe one follow-up question. So when the community looks at their tax money and it's in the general fund and it's there for a rainy day or for things like that, and that we're moving $2 million to this Section 115, the city still owns that $2 million. but it's now dedicated for this retirement investment income. So in some respects, it's not really available in the bucket that the community thought their tax dollars were in. Is that correct?
That is correct. But retirement costs are also a cost that we pay every year.
Yep.
And so typically that's around 5 to 6 million per year in retirement costs. And so one way that we can use this fund is actually we can also use it to offset our regular pension costs. So if we were ever in a situation where our general fund had no reserves available, we could definitely also draw from this fund. So in the presentation, we stated that our plan was to use this to offset pension cost increases. But if we were ever in a different situation where we had no reserves available and we really needed, let's say, to find an extra 2 million, 3 million, we could also draw from the fund and use that fund to pay the CalPERS costs that we would be paying anyways. Because every year we typically need to pay CalPERS anyways.
So that emergency fund then that we're adding 2 million to really has a total of 17.5 million currently in that bucket.
Currently it would be around 15.5, but then if we add that 2 million, it would be 17.5.
17.5. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, John. And I gave you, I'm setting everyone at 2 minutes, so I'm just going to interject because I gave you about 1.5 minutes of my time. So where do we sit county-wise and compare the rest of the jurisdictions in terms of how, can you advance the slide 1? And if I don't get the slide that I was looking for, I'll ask you to. So we're at 78.5 of the Section 115 trust. Where are the rest of the cities in our county? Do we know? Simple yes or no would be good. I mean, if we know, great. If we don't know, that's fine. We should follow up though.
The funded ratio would generally range between that 66% level and upwards of 72%. Thomas, if you have updated figures, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it does generally sit around that level. From a theoretical standpoint, when agencies combine both the actual funded ratio and any additional reserves that those agencies have accumulated either in the general fund or in a separate investment vehicle like the Section 115 trust, we don't have that up-to-date information this evening, but we can certainly provide that.
So pre-$2 million, we're being pretty generous. I mean, you know, and I thought Councilmember Woolley's questions were great. I mean, they did get at the crux of this. But at the end of it, we're basically committing this money to the retirement accounts and obligations, the pension obligations of our city workers. Is that fundamentally correct?
That's correct.
Okay, great. Vice Mayor Chow, followed by Councilmember Moore.
Can you show the slide with the public works? I have a question about the McClellan West parking lot improvement. So there is an expenditure of $39,000. So this is not one of the CIP project. Is this something else we realize we need to do?
I see Director Lee has turned his camera on.
Yes, good evening again. This was a CIP project a year or two ago, and it was the permit requirement that came to our attention after the first year required monitoring of 2 to 5 more additional years. And the line item you see on this row is for that additional monitoring required by the permitting agency.
Monitoring for what?
It's biologic, just it being near the Stevens Creek there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so required by what agency requires this kind of monitoring?
I may ask someone else to step in from Public Works that may know.
Agency or something. I'm just curious. That's okay. And the
Yeah.
second one, the vehicle accident settlement.
Mm-hmm.
What's that? So it seems there is revenue and also expenditure. So
we had a city vehicle that was damaged by a third party, and we reached settlement, and this is the city accepting those dollars as settlement for that damage to our vehicle.
Oh, but then we are also paying that much to fix the vehicle. That's the expenditure.
Well,
annual settlement we received.
Yeah, I mean, money came in for the. Money came in to fix the cost. We expended and fixed the vehicle. There may have been some additional repairs required, but we got all that we could get.
Okay.
Thanks, Vice Mayor Chow. Let me go on to Councilmember Moore.
Hey, thank you. And this is somewhat related to the audit committee. Real quickly, would someone please remind me what the PAR City of Cupertino 115-OPEB account is, which has a portfolio value of around 35, almost 36 million.
That would be a trust set up in similar fashion as the pension Section 115 trust. Rather than funding the CalPERS retirement costs, this would be funding retiree health and medical costs.
Okay, excellent. All right, and I'm just going to bring this up because for people who haven't had a chance to look at the audit committee reports that we got from U.S. Bank, in the 115 pension, some of those returns, it looks like over 60% for some of the things that it's invested in. So it did extremely well last year. Yeah, it's very impressive. So this is from the April meeting. If anyone wants to go into that, into the agenda items there for the audit committee, it's actually a really good report, and I'm very impressed with the investments that are being used by the city funds. Yeah, it feels very solid.
Thank you, Councilmember Moore. Councilmember Way.
Thank you, Mayor Paul. I have a couple questions. One of them, the one-time revenue for American Rescues Act, that's $4.8 or $4.9 million. Is that, I think that's 2 years. Next year, we're going to get the same amount of money? Is that, did I get it correct?
That's correct. That's correct, Councilmember Way. The total federal funding allocation for the city of Cupertino is approximately $9.7 million. We're going to be receiving the first payment before the end of this current fiscal year. And when we look at the proposed budget in the next item, we'll see that second payment recommended to be included.
Great, thank you. And I just want to comment on the Section 115 Pension Trust. It's really a great way for our city to secure our pension liabilities, and because we have to pay for it anyway, so I think our city is doing really well having a pension 115 pension trust. And because the investment is more flexible, like Councilmember Moore says, it looks like it performed really well.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Way. I'll go on to members of the public. I don't see any hands raised on this third quarter fiscal item. And so that being the case, let me bring it back to council. But let me give the members of the public another few seconds to raise their hand if they have any comments. Okay, there are no hands raised on this item number 16 for public commentary. And so I'll bring this back to council. May I have a motion to entertain for further discussion? Okay, Councilmember Way.
Okay, Mayor Paul, do you want 3 motions at the same time?
Why don't you try an omnibus motion all at once and then see how that works out?
Okay, so I move acceptance of the city manager's third quarter financial report for fiscal year 2020-2021 and the city work program and key project update. That's it. And second, I move adoption of resolution number 21038 approving budget modification dash number 2021-140 increasing appropriations by 787.279 and revenues by 9.552.599. And the third one will be approved the $2 million contribution from the general fund to the city's pension 115 pension trust.
Before I ask for a second, Councilmember Way, will you accept a friendly amendment to ask for some follow-up information from staff particularly related to item number 3. I'm not asking that you change the item itself, but just to get that information that I alluded to see how Cupertino is performing vis-a-vis the rest of the cities in Santa Clara County with regard to the percentage of funding of pension liabilities.
Sure.
Okay, is there a second for the motion on the table? Councilmember Moore, you have your hand raised. Are you indicating?
I have a clarification.
Okay.
To the original motion, it was saying increasing appropriations by 787.279. I'd like to correct that. It's 787,279, and revenues by 9,552,599. I just want to clarify that those are the dollar values.
Okay, let's clarify with Councilmember Way that the intent is to recite the recommended action in our agenda for.
Absolutely, that's fine.
For your motion, okay. Okay, I will go ahead and second the motion then. And so are there any further comments or questions from council at this time? Well, if there aren't, let me just say with regard to the Section 115 pension trust, I think it is very fiscally responsible. It's in keeping with the fact that, fundamentally we have a really nice city. I mean, in fact, sometimes we act so nice that, I think people tend to take our niceness for granted. And that manifests itself in any number of ways. But these percentages do not lie. When CalPERS takes the discount, is it called the discount rate? Help me with the terminology. So basically, when they take their estimated percentage returns and they decrease that means we have a higher obligation. But the thing is, every city in the entire state of California has a higher obligation because they're just going to get less of a percentage return on their money. Not every city in California or in this county is putting forward a Section 115 trust. I've been following this during my time on council. I think Thomas has been great. He started out as an intern, I believe, from Stanford and suggested this, real whiz kid early on a few years ago. This is a very generous amount of money, and to put another couple $1 million in. Again, the points from Councilmember Willie are well taken, but I do support it. I think that it is good to evince that kind of support for our employee pool. Even in a time such as this, when we have very overwhelming financial pressures combined with very unusual environmental situations. But I wanted to put that statement in there, so that we get some credit and recognition for the fact that we are very, very nice people in our community. In addition to that, I think it is, and this has been my concern from the very beginning, I think we really need to compare how we're doing vis-a-vis the other cities, because I think, this isn't one of those situations where if you stick your neck out too far, you're going to get punished. But I mean, if everybody is in this sort of compromised financial position and we are basically way up here and everyone else is kind of down here, I kind of wonder whether we're sort of not taking advantage of the fact that, everyone's going to have to deal with the problem down here when we're up here. But I would like to default on the side of being nice and, considerate and generous to our employee pool here. So those are my comments. Does anyone else have comments before we call a vote on this item? Seeing no hands, I would like to ask our city clerk, Madam City Clerk, would you please conduct a roll call vote?
Councilmember Moore?
Aye.
Councilmember Way?
Aye.
Councilmember Willie?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Chow?
Aye.
Mayor Paul?
Aye.
The motion carries unanimously.
Okay, great. Now we're on to our study session. And members of the public, you might be wondering how these study session items got placed at the back of our agenda. It was not willful or malicious. It was something that, given the timing of our study session, which normally comes before the regular meeting, it was evident that we had enough time to cover these items, and I think that we do. But I did notice also that there were a couple of financially related items near the end of our agenda, and so Grouping them together made some sense. Item number 17 is our initial study session on our fiscal year 21-22 proposed budget starting on July 1st. And so would anyone from staff, Madam City Manager, would you like to introduce the item as well as the staff members who will be presenting?
I'm just going to hand it right over to the Director of Administrative Services, Christina Alfaro.
Okay, great. Welcome back.
Thank you.
So
good evening again, Mayor, City Council members, Christina Alfaro, Director of Administrative Services, and with me this evening, I have the same team who just presented third quarter. So Zach Korach, the city's finance manager, and Thomas Leung, senior management analyst for the department. Before we jump into the fiscal year 2021-22 proposed budget, I just want to take a moment to thank budget team staff, department heads, and department staff for their enormous amount of effort to get our budget printed on May 1st. It is a large document that takes a lot of teamwork. So we get to be up here presenting it this evening, but it really is a culmination of quite a few months of work. So I want to say thank you to them, and then a big thank you for her leadership and direction to Deborah Fang, our city manager. So with that, we will kick off the presentation. Just kind of trying to set aside what are our goals for this presentation. And before I fully jump in, I know as part of the third quarter presentation, Council let us get through the entirety of the presentation before asking questions, and we just request that you do the same with this presentation. We're going to try to get through it as expeditiously as possible so there's sufficient time for questions.
And Director Alfaro, I just want to, before you jump into the presentation, confirm the time allocation that was requested or estimated by staff as approximately half an hour for this presentation.
Correct. We're going to try to get it done in 20 minutes.
Okay, great.
Timing around that time. So with that, for this study session, what we're really looking for are comments from our council and members, comments and questions from our city council and members of the public. And then what we do with those comments and questions is we will take those and incorporate them as part of the final budget hearing and adoption. And we have council vote on any of those changes from the proposed budget, and that then becomes our final adopted budget. So similar to what we presented last year as part of proposed budget and part of our COVID plan, there's some major themes in this budget. The first being how we're weathering the COVID storm, right? And it's kind of a mixed bag of information. We've done phenomenal on our sales tax side, as Zach will go into in a little more detail in this presentation, but we've also seen declines in our transient occupancy tax. We'll know that there's certain uncertainty around what our sales tax may look like in the future, any impacts that telework may have on our property tax, and really when do we expect hotels to come back and at what level that might look like. But we're positioned well, building on a strong fiscal foundation that included when the city received large one-time dollars, whether that be from the sale of Prune Ridge Avenue or other development projects, really putting dollars aside to focus on infrastructure items like our pavement condition index, putting dollars away to have a fully funded retiree health account, and focusing on other infrastructure projects as part of our capital improvement plan. And even though we did all of that with those one-time dollars, we still have a strong foundation on our fund balance. And what that really allows us to do, and what we've seen it allow us to do during COVID, is it buys us time to make the right decisions. We have a little more time to understand if we need to cut, how deep we need to cut, where maybe other agencies around us made deeper cuts than they needed to, or not deepest cuts as they needed to, because they didn't have this fund balance available to them to help them buy that time to make a better decision. With that, I will turn it over to, actually, no, just kidding. I've got the next slide as well. We're going to put the budget cycle slide up here next, since the same slide Zach went over as part of third quarter. We are at the top of this circle at the proposed budget in May. As I mentioned earlier, we'll be back to council on June 15th to do the final budget hearing and adoption, and then we report quarterly to council on the status of the budget. My final slide before I hand it over to Zach is actually the next one. and it's telling you about how you would access our budget, how you get to the city's transparency portal that has 10 years worth of financial data at the account level, with different chart visualizations if anybody wants to go in and kind of poke around and play with some of those items. It's a cool tool, and it's very user-friendly. We want to also highlight a couple of new things that we have on the city's budget page. The first being the resident tax calculator, where you're able to go in and enter what you estimate you spend on sales tax in a year in the city. If you own a home, the estimated value of your home. And what it does is it kicks out for you kind of where your tax dollars are being, how much you're contributing and where your tax dollars are being spent in a really kind of fun, interactive, illustrative way. The second tool for anybody who may have attended our virtual Budget and Bites budget community workshop this year is a forecast transparency tool. And in this tool, we kind of invite you to join our budget team, and you get to look at an illustrative 10-year forecast, and you decide what you want to fund on the expense side and what assumptions you want to make on the revenue side. And the goal is to have you balance the general fund over 10 years. So if anybody has an opportunity to go look at those, it's part of our education component of our budget process. We really want to engage our residents and want them to understand the budget process and where their tax dollars are going. So with that, I will hand it over to Zach, who will take us through the agenda and our forecast for the general fund.
Thank you, Christina. So as far as the agenda goes, we'll be looking at the general fund assumptions and some information on the general fund's forecast. We'll be looking at the all fund summary, the individual department requests. We'll be discussing issues and challenges, and then finish it off with the budget calendar. So we're going to first look at the proposed revenues for fiscal year 21-22. You'll see at the bottom of this chart, we are proposing revenues to increase $10.4 million or 13% over the previous adopted year. This is primarily attributable to anticipated declines in general fund revenues at the same point last year. We look at sales tax, transient occupancy tax. We were anticipating those declines directly resulting from COVID-19. In reality, we experienced some different experiences, and we're going to talk about just a few of these specific revenue categories. The first being sales tax. As we discussed in the third quarter financial report, we're really anticipating sales tax to come in closer to $33 million. And what that means is that we are proposing a decrease or a decline in sales tax year over year. The reason being is that although there were positive experiences over the last 12 to 15 months due to COVID-19, the closure of brick and mortar retail shops across the state spurred increases in online sales. Additionally, the mass conversion to a telework environment across the state increased demand in computer and electronic products. And again, that all had a positive influence on the city's sales tax revenues. But we do believe that that is a one-time experience. As the state continues to recover, businesses continue to open up, the vaccine continues to roll out, we believe that that those online sales will inherently decrease as the brick and mortar increases, and demand for those computer and electronic products will decline over recent actuals. Property tax, again, as I mentioned, as part of third quarter, it continues to be one of the most stable revenue sources for the city. A proposed increase of $2.5 million or 10%. I will note, however, that for the first time in over a decade, the Santa Clara County Assessor's Office had elected not to use the maximum 2% CPI as a growth factor to apply to the property tax roll. Rather, they had elected to use a growth factor of 1.036. And that's really just an indication of the uncertainty and the potential or possible influence of COVID-19 on property values within the county. Transient occupancy tax, we discussed the devastation of that revenue source since the onset of the pandemic. We are anticipating ending the current fiscal year with approximately $2 million in TOT revenues. And comparing that with the proposed revenue of $3 million, what we're recommending is a commencement of the recovery. We're going to be discussing this in more detail when we discuss the forecast. But over the next 3 fiscal years, we'll see TOT increase to approximately $7.5 million. The last category I want to focus on is intergovernmental. We see obviously a huge jump And as Councilmember Way had pointed out as part of third quarter financial report, that increase is due to the American Rescue Plan Act and that second payment that the city is anticipating to receive. When we look at the proposed expenditures within the general fund, we're proposing an increase of compensation and benefits of $2 million. Again, this is driven by cost of living adjustments, step increases for various positions, and increases in retirement, CalPERS retirement costs, as well as health rate cost increases. Materials, we're seeing an $800,000 increase or 13%. And this is vastly driven by increases in water rates across the general fund. These rates are set and imposed by San Jose Water Company. Contract services is increasing approximately $2.5 million or 12%. About $1 million of this increase is attributable to the city's law enforcement contract with the county. The remainder would be one-time department requests. We'll be discussing those in detail in the department request slides. And then lastly, capital outlays and special projects. At this point in time, we're seeing a decrease over last year's adopted. That's really because the city work program for the proposed budget year has yet to be approved by or adopted and approved by City Council. At that point, once it is, we'll make sure, and hopefully on June 15th, we'll make sure that all of the budgetary impacts and the numbers are updated and reflected to match the approved work program. I want to get into the general fund forecast, the 10-year forecast, and discuss some of the varying assumptions. As has been past practice, we construct 3 varying forecast models ranging from A, B, and C. Forecast A is a bit more of an optimistic look at the forecast. Forecast B is a moderate look, and I will note that forecast B is the recommended forecast by staff for inclusion in the proposed and eventually the final adopted budget document. And then lastly, forecast C, a more of a pessimistic look at the forecast model. We're really going to be focusing on sales tax, property tax, and transient occupancy tax. For purposes of these 3 forecast models, we have not made any adjustments to the other revenue categories or anything on the expenditure side. The reason being is that we are really not anticipating any significant fluctuations in those other revenue categories or expenditure amounts. Furthermore, we also believe that there's significant and higher volatility as well as uncertainty that lies within these 3 revenue categories as we look towards the future and recover from COVID-19. So what I'll do is just quickly go over the varying degrees for which these assumptions change across the 3 models. For sales tax, we're starting with, in forecast A, a projected amount in the upcoming budget year of $29.1 million, $27.9 million in forecast B, $26.6 million in forecast C. The reason why these sales tax figures are changing so drastically is because, as I mentioned, one of the challenges in predicting or projecting where sales tax is going to end up in the near future really is because of the one-time positive experience that the city has realized over the last 15 months in trying to gauge where that new normal and new sales tax base is going to end up. We believe that the levels of demand for computer and electronic products over the last 15 months is really not sustainable or expected to continue at the same clip. And at this point in time, we're recommending $27.9 million as the reasonable estimate for inclusion in the budget. Property tax, again, because of its historic stability, we're proposing a property tax amount in the upcoming year of $27.8 million. What we have done is we've adjusted the annual growth rates over the 10-year forecast period. In forecast A, we're using a growth assumption of 3% annually, and this is closely aligned with historic growth. Forecast B uses a bit more moderate of an annual growth rate of 2.5%. And then lastly, forecast C uses an annual growth rate of 0.5%. Admittedly, this is a very nominal growth factor for the property taxes of the city, but it is a best effort attempt to try to capture and quantify any potential long-term and or permanent impacts of a telecommute environment, not only within the city, but within the greater region in the Bay Area, and what the impact might be on property values over a 10-year period. Transient occupancy tax, we're varying in forecast A, projecting a $10 million amount, and this closely aligns with historic actuals at pre-pandemic periods. Forecast B is recommended at $7.5 million, representing a 25% reduction. In forecast C at $5 million and a 50% reduction. For all three of these models, these transient occupancy tax recovery levels are achieved in fiscal year 23-24. The slide before you here is, we're focusing in on forecast B here and looking at the proposed or recommended revenues. We're breaking this out by classification or category, the various types of revenues within the general fund. We're showing it by fiscal year. I want to call attention to the significance of the city sales tax and property tax making up more than 50% of the general fund's revenues. But I also want to call attention to the green line at the top and where it intersects each of the bars in the respective fiscal years. The green bar denotes total expenditures over the forecasted period. And it's important to notice that over the first 4 years of this chart, revenues are exceeding expenditures, which generates an operating surplus. For the remainder of the forecast period, expenditures begin to outpace revenues and exceed them for the remainder of the forecast period. And that results in an operating deficit and reduces unassigned fund balance within the general fund. The slide before you here is the same information, it's just flipped. We're looking at the expenditures on the bars as opposed to the revenues, and we're looking at the revenues on the top line. And again, consistent with the previous slide, we're seeing that operating surplus in the first 4 years where revenues are exceeding expenditures, but then expenditures outpace the revenues for the remainder of the forecast period and exceed that revenue line. We're going to look at it in the following slide here, I think in a bit more of a clear way. The bars here represent the annual operating surpluses over the forecast period. And this really represents the difference between the bars in the previous slide and the line that intersected. Starting in fiscal year 21, we are anticipating ending the current fiscal year with $7.5 million in an operating surplus. As I mentioned, we are anticipating a decrease in sales tax in respect to the previous year. That's where we're seeing the reduction in that operating surplus. But over the next 2 years, we see a bit of a build back or a climb, and that is represented by a recovery in the transient occupancy tax. We want to keep in mind that in fiscal year 21, the current fiscal year, we're anticipating $2 million in TOT, $3 million in fiscal year 22, $5 million in fiscal year 23, and then ultimately up to that $7.5 million full recovery level. Thereafter, each year thereafter in the forecast, we see the annual operating surplus drop below the line into annual operating deficits. And we're seeing this for 2 reasons. The first being expenditures are outpacing or growing at a faster rate than the city's revenues. And that means expenditure classifications like compensation and benefits, contract services, materials, they are increasing annually faster than the city's property tax, sales tax, and transient occupancy tax. Secondly, the city's forecast models do incorporate a recessionary assumption in 2 of the fiscal years of the forecast period, the first being in fiscal year 25 and the second being in fiscal year 29. What we do is we hold revenues stagnant in that respective fiscal year, but we let expenditures grow at a regular clip. And so we can see that pronounced reduction in the operating surplus or deficit in those 2 periods. This is really a best effort to try to capture and again quantify any economic downturns that the city might experience and realize over a forecasted period. The last thing I'll call attention to on this slide is the last bar in fiscal year 31. We actually see a reduction in that surplus, or excuse me, a reduction in that deficit amount. And this notes the city's debt and the certificates of participation being fully repaid. What's really happening is the general fund is no longer needing to make the annual transfer to the debt service funds to make those debt service payments. And that results in savings to the general fund. So the last chart that we're going to look at as it pertains to the forecast and surpluses and deficits, excuse me, I'll go back one, is the unassigned fund balance forecast within the general fund. And we're looking at this across all 3 forecast models. And what this really does, this takes the annual operating surpluses and it applies it to the beginning unassigned fund balance in the general fund. So if we start at $39.1 million, if you recall, as part of 3rd quarter financial report, this is the amount of unassigned fund balance that the city is anticipating ending the year with. and then applying the annual operating surpluses and deficits from forecast A, projects to end the forecasted period in fiscal year 31 with $78.6 million. Forecast B, the recommended moderate forecast, would anticipate or project to use or burn $13 million of that unassigned fund balance and end with $26.1 million. And then lastly, and most adversely, forecast C, the pessimistic look at the forecast model, would end with a negative $38.1 million. And I want to focus on the gray bar, forecast B, the recommended, because there are important considerations to take or to make when you're looking at those varying forecast models. And specifically for moderate, it's important to keep in mind that the unassigned fund balance, it's ending with $26.1 million at the end of a 10-year period. That's a very strong factor. Additionally, keeping in mind that the economic uncertainty reserve is intact at $19 million. And lastly, Section 115 trust for pension is also intact at $35 million in fiscal year 31. As part of the third quarter financial report, we were talking about balances of $17.5 million. Over the next 10 years, we would project that Section 115 trust to grow and accumulate to a balance of $35 million and be available to serve as that general fund mitigation for offsetting future pension costs. Next, in kind of on the other side of the scale, it's important to keep in mind that any anticipated or future development projects are not included in this forecast. That means if we're thinking about hotels or new developments, any potential fiscal impacts that general fund or the city may realize from those projects, they are not included in the forecast. And then lastly, as far as CIP funding goes, there are no operating transfers included in the forecast from the general fund to the capital reserve. And what that means is any future CIP projects that council chooses to fund beyond this upcoming fiscal year would be funded one of three ways. It would come out of the projected $26.1 million in unassigned fund balance in the general fund. It would be funded via external funding sources, whether it's a grant or a donation. And then lastly, through debt financing to fund those capital projects. So with that, I will turn it over to our senior management analyst, Thomas Leung, and he will be taking over with the all fund summary and the department requests.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I'm Thomas Leung. This is the second year we're holding a proposed budget study session on Zoom, and I admit it still feels strange. Last year, we were recommending budget reductions to reduce the financial impacts of the pandemic. Because of the budget reductions and also surprising increases to our sales tax, we're in a strong financial position with healthy reserves. As a result, you'll see that this year's proposed budget includes recommendations for some projects that were put on hold last year. Today, I'll be going through the all fund summary, then I'll go through expense requests by department, and finally, I'll be talking about issues and challenges. I'll start with this all fund summary. So we have expenses here by account classification for all funds, excluding the general fund. First, compensation is rising due to cost of living adjustments and step increases. Second, we see that benefits are growing due to increases in pension and health insurance costs. With contract services, we see that they're increasing primarily due to the return of parks and recreation classes, which were either reduced or canceled in fiscal year 2021. And finally, special projects are increasing mainly because of street maintenance project. So total expenses are increasing by 2.8 million or 9%. Now I'd like to move on to the expense requests for each department. Let's start with City Council and Commissions. Here we have a request for community funding grants. The city received 17 applications for a total of 92,900. In our budget, we also have 20,000 in funding for the Historical Society to consider. Community funding requests are not currently included in the budget, but we will add them to our budget once we receive City Council's direction later tonight. In administration, we have 169,400 in requests. This includes 78,000 for phase 2 of the Climate Action Plan and 75,000 for a new city seal. And you can see that work programs are marked with an X. And another point about work program items is that since the work program went to City Council after we published this document, we use placeholders for the work program items. This means that if there are any changes in either the financial impacts or the projects themselves, we will update the budget with the approved work program projects.
Thomas, before you go on, how are you on the estimated time? It's been about 20 minutes. And I note that we're not really quite halfway on the slide deck. So can staff give us a sense of how much longer the presentation will be?
There should be about 10 minutes left.
Okay. All right, just please try to keep the time economy in mind. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. And so on the next slide, we have the law enforcement department. There's a request for $963,900 for a contract with the sheriff's office. This contract increases annually by CPI plus 2% and retirement cost increases. Compared to the fiscal year 2021 adopted budget, the contract increased by 6.3%. On the next slide, we have the IT department. They're requesting $729,000 in special projects. Please refer to pages 38 and 39 in the proposed budget document for a full list of their projects. Some requests include $60,000 for a security framework and audit to enhance cybersecurity. There's also $32,000 for a council voting system and timer, $65,000 for a customer service solution for community development, and finally $50,000 for ERP exploration. For Parks and Recreation, we have 76,000 requests. This includes 75,000 for Cupertino Cares. Due to the pandemic and the cancellation of most community events and festivals in 2020, Cupertino Cares is a community engagement program. It provides ways for families, friends, and neighbors to stay connected to each other and the city while staying at home. And this has included giveaways such as emergency preparedness kits, 4th of July in a box, and other such projects. All these programs have received positive reviews from community members. And on the next slide, we have our festivals. So we have 12 city festivals, and this includes waived fees and city expenses. And total expenses are expected to be $143,644. And of course, this is assuming that the festivals will be able to be held. For community development, requests total 1.27 million. The majority of these projects are related to the work program. So as we mentioned earlier, if there are any changes to the work program, the budget will be updated. Public Works is requesting 7.1 million. This includes 100,000 for the municipal water system, which is the city work program project. Some other notable projects include 130,000 for vehicle miles traveled analysis and 3.1 million for streets, parking lots, and park pathways. And a complete list is on pages 38 and 39. In non-departmental, proposed expenditures are 14 million, a decrease of 1.2 million from the fiscal year 2021 adopted budget. This decrease is because transfers for the capital improvement program are not currently budgeted. Once we add capital improvement program transfers, this budget will increase. And I'll also mention that debt service payments decrease by 493,000 due to debt refinancing. And now let's look at the items for the final budget hearing. Every year we publish the budget on May 1st. A few requests were not finalized at that time, so we did not include them when we published the budget. But we expect to incorporate the changes listed here for the final budget hearing. We've broken out the items by fund, and let's start with the general fund. We have 63,376. These are operational costs for the City Hall Annex, or the property on 10455 Torrey Avenue. We also have 92,900 in community funding, 372,000 for library services, and 755,000 for 4 position requests. So I'll also mention that these position requests are in addition to the 2 that were listed in the budget. So that would bring the total to 6 position requests in this budget. We also have 500,000 for CDD legal costs, and we also have city work program changes, bringing the total for the general fund to 2.6 million, offset by 177,000 in revenues. Now that we've gone through the general fund, let's look at all the other funds. Some of the totals on this list seem large, but that is because this table also includes transfers. So if you see that 3.65 million in revenues, that's a transfer. Majority of it's a transfer. The 8.168 million in the 8.158 million, in revenues is also represents transfers, and that 11.4 million in expenses represent transfers. So the main point in this slide is that total capital improvement program expenses are 14.8 million. And we also have a few changes to the work program on this slide as well. Now that we've seen the expense requests, let's look at issues and challenges. The first challenge is COVID-19. COVID-19 has had dramatic effects on the city's revenues. Transient occupancy taxes fell due to a reduction in travel, and in contrast, sales tax revenues reached record highs because of increases in business-to-business and online sales. Why does this matter? We believe that record high sales tax revenues were mainly due to the pandemic. So as the state continues to roll out vaccines and as businesses continue to reopen, sales tax revenues are expected to decline. Also, if local businesses transition to teleworking, property values may decrease, impacting our property tax revenues. And finally, business travel may never be the same as it was before COVID, and this could affect our transient occupancy taxes. So what revenues look like in the new normal will significantly affect the city's future. The second challenge is revenue volatility. Business-to-business sales taxes and a single tax producer make up a large portion of the city's revenues. We saw during the dot-com crash and also during COVID-19 that business-to-business sales tax are affected by business and economic fluctuations. Because a single business generates so much of our revenues, ups and downs in their business, or changes to the way sales tax is allocated can substantially impact our revenues. The third challenge is capital project funding. As Zach mentioned earlier, we fund capital projects 1 year at a time. This means that if we do want to add capital projects in the future, we would need to either use reserves, debt funding, or other external funding sources to pay for them. And the last challenge is retirement costs. Since we covered this in the third quarter report, I won't go into detail on it. Now I'll go through our staffing requests. And I'll just wait until we get to the staffing slide. So departments are proposing 6 new positions. The Emergency Services Analyst and Environmental Programs Coordinator were discussed in the published proposed budget. The other 4 positions were added after we published that book. So the Community Development Department is requesting 3 positions, namely a Senior Planner in Planning and a Permit Technician and Plan Check Engineer in the Building Division. And these positions are requested because of increases in planning applications and building permits. The Administration Department is requesting an Emergency Services Analyst to enhance emergency management planning and a response to all hazards. Public Works is requesting 2 positions, including a CIP Project Manager to accommodate proposed CIP projects for fiscal year 2022, and also an Environmental Programs Coordinator because of new legislation, or SB 1383, which is related to the diversion of organic materials from landfills. This new legislation will require extensive field work, records management, and reporting, which is why they're requesting that Environmental Programs Coordinator. And this Environmental Programs Coordinator is also in the Enterprise Fund and is not anticipated to affect the General Fund. let's talk about what's coming up next in the budget cycle. So for fiscal year 22, we have our CIP presentation and budget hearing on June 15th, and then our first quarter report on November 2021. In November, in our first quarter report, we'll update you on our financial status and also recommend any budget adjustments. When developing our budget in this time of unprecedented change and uncertainty, fiscal responsibility was our main concern. We know that the decisions we make today will affect the city not only today, but long term. We look forward to hearing your questions and comments. Thank you.
Okay, we are at 11:22. We have a little bit more than a half an hour left before midnight. I'm going to ask that our city council limit their questions to a couple of minutes before we go to our members of the public. Of course, when we bring it back, there will be time for follow-up questions. I don't see any hands raised at this point.
Mayor, sorry.
I don't see any hands raised from council at this point. Councilmember Moore, your hand has just raised.
Sure. Okay, thank you. This is a great report. I really enjoyed going through the budget. I have more than a couple of questions and comments. I have 14 or 15. So I'm not really sure how you would best like this to be handled. Do you want, I can email to staff or start going through a few of them? You know, what's your suggestion, Mayor Paul?
So I'll stop your time at this point. I would suggest, did you say that you had written down your questions, Councilmember Moore?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So I would suggest that you select one question, frankly, your best question, and then take the other questions that you can't get to in the follow-up and submit them to the city clerk. And we'll provide direction to staff to follow up and in the following session to provide answers as well as, to provide answers in a written format with the publication of the agenda so that it gets released to the public as well as to council prior to the next meeting.
And how many minutes? Oh, yes, thank you.
I would also recommend that the questions just be read in open session here so the public has an opportunity to hear them.
So read my paper. Okay, I can do that.
But I understand that the questions are quite voluminous, are they not?
Not really. Some of them are just statements.
Okay, well, we're not going to be able to cover them in 2 minutes is my point.
Okay, how about I just read it? It's a page and a third, and then I can pick one at the end. Okay?
Okay.
Shall we? Okay. Community outreach improvements to get input regarding the proposed budget goals and process. The proposed budget mentions input from the audit and fiscal strategic plan committees. However, neither has reviewed the proposed budget for input. Should these committees receive the proposed budget prior to coming to City Council in the future, or is this process order better as it is? The Fiscal Strategic Plan Committee is not codified and has no codified duty to review the proposed budget. 2, the organizational charts need to reflect the Cupertino Municipal Code. Please add the date of organizational chart, update the online chart, and please update the CMC, the municipal code, to reflect the current organizational structure, e.g. add the IT department. This should probably not be a work plan item, but an ongoing process of CMC cleanup. 3, the CMC mentions potential public safety department should police and fire be administered by the city. The city contracts out both. How is the fire department paid for? 4, please provide the financial policy for the city manager's allowable amount to contract for without having any review. Is this a one-time contract amount of $175,000, or can the contract be renewed year after year? 5, city manager discretionary spending was $743 for 2020, yet the 2022 proposed budget is $593,250. Additionally, the program overview states that the contingency budget for the city manager requires the city manager approval. I would recommend this amount be removed and a policy for oversight be put in place. The city manager's overall budget has increased from $786,535 in 2019. That's expenditures plus contingencies to $2,115,071 proposed for 2022. How is this increase accounted for? 6, economic development has switched to a contract service and has more than doubled in cost. 7, some committees use staff time, which seems to imply they have a budget amount and are not codified. Economic Development Committee, Disaster Council.
Councilmember Moore, that's
Yeah.
that's 2 minutes, and so let me go on to any other council member that has some questions at this point. Councilmember Willie.
I'll just go ahead and cede my time. I think Councilman Moore is covering, the important consideration. So I'll cede my time to her.
Okay, Councilmember Moore.
Okay. Okay, 7. Some committees use staff time. Okay, I did that one. 8, multiple projects which are not approved in the city council work plan show up in the proposed budget, new logo, online store. This was addressed. Please remove these items from other headings such as contract services to a new heading which indicates they are proposed work plan items and not approved. 9, communications cost seems to be a separate area. Could this be shown as a group? And that is like with the video recording getting moved under the city manager. 10, it's unclear how much of the cultural events, $402,137, how much of those items will occur, such as the 4th of July celebration. A similar item, neighborhood events, has $163,119. Raises the same question. The total events, $565,256. 11, economic development was $89,910 for 2019 actual expenditure and is now proposed at fiscal year 2022 at $337,000 with a new contingency and materials amount of over $60,000 with no staffing. Additionally, there's no codified economic development committee which uses staff time. This area needs attention. And also, looking at the staffing chart we were just shown, it looks like we need to have under economic development another staffing asked for the economic development manager. 12, please explain the large increase in the BMR Affordable Housing Fund, which shows an increase of revenue from 2019 actual of $159,000 in taxes to 2022 proposed budget taxes of $3.6 million. There's an allocation for $600,000 shown for homelessness and other special projects which has not been approved, and the city resolution to support the county task force on homelessness indicated that the city would participate in a countywide program which the city would likely be asked to contribute financially to. 13, I'm almost done. Code enforcement has increased from $508,000.
But let me sorry,
Yep.
that does exhaust Councilmember Willie's time now.
All right.
So there are no other hands raised. I'll go ahead and give you my time. So,
Okay. 2 more. Code enforcement has increased from $508,000 in 2019 to $1.2 million proposed 2022. So the question is what happened there? And lastly, facilities would be easier to track if they were grouped together. For instance, facilities and fleet next to grounds, for example, and this is in relation to, for instance, Blackberry Farm has two separate entries, but I have to flip very far to get to both of them. And I'm also curious where Stockelmeyer, Byrne, and I believe it's called the Bletch property are located in the budget. Thank you, and John, Councilmember Willie, and Mayor Paul for the time.
Oh, sure. Thank you for putting the time into constructing such thoughtful questions. Councilmember Way, followed by Vice Mayor Chow.
Thank you, Mayor Paul. I have a lot of questions too, but I'm not going to name them. I just feel that this proposed budget is very tentative because we have not passed our city work and or CIP plans. So I think a lot of questions might be able to be answered once we pass those, and this, they have to revise it. So I'm going to write my questions to the staff so that they can answer it. I just feel this is a real tentative proposed budget.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Councilmember Way. Vice Mayor Chow.
Okay, hi. So first question regarding the festivals. We see a list of festivals from Night Market, Fall Festival, Holi. There are waived fees and then city expenses. So what's the application process for this kind of festival? What if other organizations also wish their festival to get fee waived and the city support? How do they do that? I asked this question earlier. I didn't get an answer. So, and then the second question is, why do we need a another CIP program manager. It doesn't seem we have an extraordinary CIP projects now. How are we expanding our capacity? And then I'd like more detail on the environmental program. Why do we need a full-time staff for that? And and then another is the electric cook workshop that appears to be not a work program. So who proposed that and who approves it? And then does the forecast that we see include at least the maintenance that we need to do in CIP? I think when we do fiscal forecast, we must include maintenance of the buildings that at least we can get from past few years. No, we have an estimate. This every year we need at least this much in CIP to maintain the buildings, a storage drain or whatever. So please include that in the forecast. And then the last one is workforce development. I understand that we will face a significant lack of workforce because of retirement. What's the plan for that? I see that other cities are supporting internships and outreach to teens and college students to advertise the benefits of working for a city government, for a public agency. I think that had some plan. I would like to know more detail. Thank you.
Wow, that was really well timed. That's exactly 2 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and start my clock back, and I'm going to ask our city staff if there is bandwidth for perhaps after our next visit to the work plan, which I believe is on May 26th, to bring this back as an extended study session, part 2, before we have the agenda item where we're expected to finalize the budget. Is that something that could be placed into our agenda? Because it does seem like we have a number of follow-on items here. And with the work plan, it may be a good idea to have a similar session to this.
I think we can probably do that, particularly if we can complete the community grants discussion today.
Understood. Okay, thank you, Madam City Manager. All right, so I only have the hand still raised from Vice Mayor Chow. Did you want to say, well, actually you exhausted your 2 minutes.
All right, yeah.
Okay, great. Let's go to our members of the public. I won't diminish the regular 3-minute time, but I do ask that respectfully that our members of the public be as succinct as you possibly can. We have hands raised from Peggy Griffin as well as Bruce Parsons. And as long as hands are raised before the end of Peggy's comments, I will call on you. So welcome, Peggy.
Good evening, council members and staff. And thank you, Kirsten, for always putting the slides up. I have 2 feedback requests. One is to provide a file with all the chapters in one file. I wanted to search for something and I had to open up every single file to try and figure out where it went, where I could find it. The other is that the names of the files match the names listed in the agenda. When I go to download the files, they were A, B, C, D, and they didn't have anything giving me table of contents, introduction, and I've seen this several different times with attachments for agenda items. So those are my 2 requests. The questions I have, I only had a chance to look at the administration chapter, but there is $1.5 million for what? For the city manager. I don't understand what it covers, what's entailed. Economic development is completely blank. There's no money at all, but there were a lot of items in the previous item that we discussed, which should be mentioned. And $600,000 for city manager contingency fund. I don't know what that involves. So I don't know where to look to find out what fits into that bucket. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Peggy. Our next speaker is Bruce Parsons. Bruce is also our last speaker, his is normally hand up. Welcome, Bruce. Bruce, if you're speaking, we can't hear you, and so it might be a technological difficulty, but.
Yeah, how about that?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Thank you very much. I just had one comment. First off, I appreciate the time. I'm very new at this, first city council I've ever sat in on, even though I've lived here 45 years. But I had just a comment about the 6 new staff positions. Maybe I'm a little bit out of tune, but it seems to me that the budget looked like they were about $175,000 a piece for each of those positions, including benefits. To me, seems fairly outrageous. And that's the end of my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. I really appreciate your succinctness. You definitely got your point across. So let's bring this back to City Council at this time. We do have a number of outstanding questions. Again, this is our initial study session. We've posed those. Is there an appetite to request an immediate staff follow-up to any of the questions posed by our council or public at this time? Or do we want to give our staff time with another follow-up study session on the budget to more thoroughly answer the questions in a written format and produce those for our council and the public? Councilmember Moore, your hand is raised.
I prefer the latter, that we provide staff more time and that we come back and look at this again and see if we can get the answers. And if there are other questions that council members have, that they get a chance to ask them and get that all answered. I'm a little bit concerned about the item 18 that's following on, because it sounds as though that's going to influence the budget, and I feel as though we're kind of piecemeal approving part of the budget, and that concerns me.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Moore, for your comment. Let me go backwards. With regard to the community funding grant program, I don't know what the outcome of that will be tonight with regard to the authorizations. But with respect to the follow-on to this item, I would suggest that we give staff direction to go back and provide written responses to the feedback and questions from the public as well as council prior to our follow-up study session. And so I'll just move that in the form of a motion. Can I have a second for that? Councilmember Moore, your hand is raised.
Second.
All right. Vice Mayor Chow, your hand is raised.
So additional question, do we say them here or just one more?
Okay, please feel free to add a question and I'll take that in as part of the motion.
So the 6 staff, I see that additional planner, plan check engineer, I suppose all these might be covered by the fees that we charge for the additional work. So I wonder how much of the cost actually will be covered by the permit fees, the plan check fees, and the development fees. That might be, so it's not plan, just additional stuff.
Okay, thank you, Vice Mayor Chow. I'll take that under submission as part of the motion. As an additional question regarding cost recovery for each of the proposed new positions. Councilmember Moore, will you accept that as the seconder to the motion as an additional question?
Yes.
Okay. Madam City Clerk, would you please conduct the roll call vote on the motion?
Councilmember Moore?
Aye.
Councilmember Way?
Aye.
Councilmember Willie?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Chow?
Aye.
Mayor Paul?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, so at this point, we do, I'm sorry.
Mayor, can I ask?
Who's speaking? Okay, Madam City Manager, yes.
Sorry. Can I ask for all of the questions for council to send them in to Kirsten to gather them up so that we can have one set of questions that we can go forward to the departments with.
Okay, well, I think we'll have to ask our city clerk to do some follow-up with regard to the public commentary and the questions from there. But I think from council, we can ask that we forward our questions as they were recited tonight to the city clerk, if that would be logistically easier for, I think particular council member Moore's questions, if she has them written down, to forward those, that should save a good amount of time.
Vice Mayor as well.
And Vice Mayor Chow
Yeah.
had a number of questions written down as well, yes.
Oh, can we add also Peggy's question?
Those are in the motion, those are captured in the motion.
Okay, I'll include those.
Okay, okay, you'll include those in the, okay, in your
I have
email
a
to the city clerk.
screenshot. I'll include those.
Okay,
You
excellent.
actually provided them to me as well.
Oh, that's right, because you shared them, right, Madam City Clerk? Okay, we're running a little bit short on time. This community funding grant program item, I can propose 2 courses of action. We could try to get this done. I will hold us to a midnight, firm stop. But I was trying to implement a continuation to the next night. I don't think this should take too long if we do continue it to Wednesday evening. And so let me see what the pleasure of the council is to try to get this done in the next 15 minutes or so, or to continue it to tomorrow evening, which I think would be a rather short item. Well, an agenda, I should say.
Mayor Paul, do you just want us to say what our preference is?
Yes, please. By hands, Councilmember Moore.
I prefer that we continue it, given the budget was well over 500 pages.
Okay, continue it to tomorrow, correct? No, I'm talking about item number 18, the community funding.
Correct. Yes. No, I'm just saying that it was the previous item was huge. So if we could, I would really appreciate it if we could move it off.
I kind of absorb a little bit. Okay. Vice Mayor Chow.
Oh, sorry.
So if we are going to have another budget study session, maybe this can be done together.
Yes. So I was going to make that very suggestion, Mr. Mayor. We have a work program item coming back on May 26th. You could put it there. We could also do it, I believe, June 1st, because we don't have a study session on the front end of that. So continuation, including the grant process.
I think we'll have to take a look at the totality of the schedule on June 1st, but if that works out, then I think we could very well put it there. I would be hesitant to lump it together with our work program on May 26th. Yeah, so June 1st. Okay, so that's option C from Vice Mayor Chow and our city manager to continue this item number 18 to June 1st. Let me go back to Councilmember Moore. Do you have a preference between tomorrow or June 1st?
I'll leave it to the rest of council. I personally don't mind either way, but it's adding an extra meeting. So I'm more inclined to say add it to an existing meeting that we were planning on being at, rather than adding another day during the week.
Okay, so that would be our regular June 1st council meeting then. Council member Way or Willie, any opinion?
I'm good. Sorry. I'm good with June 1st.
June 1st, and Council member Willie?
Yeah, I'd say June 1st, combine it with the other meeting.
Okay, well then let's go ahead and table item number 18 to a study session at the beginning of our June 1st regularly scheduled council meeting. So that, yes.
Sorry, add a little comment that there was a question, why is this item separate from the budget? It used to be combined. Then the community grant is like buried under all that stuff.
Right.
So I think I requested to separate that. So this raise it up, bring more attention, because this is a community grant. So.
Right. And with apologies to the attendees that are attending on behalf of the community funding grant program, I hope that our visitation of the budget was a good prelude, and we will be putting this front and center on June 1st. And so, perhaps in a brighter and earlier hour, when we have more of this budgetary item percolating and a couple of weeks to consider with the materials already out in the public, which I think is a really good thing in terms of disclosure. So I think let's, Madam City Attorney, will you require a motion in order to continue this? Do you think that would be best to do?
If it's on the June 1st meeting, you could say we table it to June 1st, but we would publish a new agenda on June 1st with this item republished.
Okay, I'll just say that then. We'll because we do have consensus for June 1st, we'll go ahead and table this item number 18 to that date for the study session item. Okay, we are on to the conclusion of tonight's agenda, and I believe that's future items, council and staff comments and future agenda items. Oral communications were completed, and so that is unnecessary to continue here. Madam City Manager, are there any staff comments at this point? Hearing.
I do not have any. I don't have any staff comments at this time.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Very good. So I don't see, actually, I do see 4 members of the public with their hands raised. And so, all right, I'm going to have to refer to our city attorney at this point. Should I go back and take comments with regard to our tabling, since we're tabling the item to a future date?
The item was never open to be heard, so public comment on that item would occur when it's heard.
Okay, very good. And I'm assuming that public commentary is not for council and staff comments and future agenda items. It's not our custom to take comment on that. And so I won't initiate that as a practice here. I'll go to our city council by show of hands. If there are any final comments or future agenda items to be proposed, Councilmember Willie.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering if we can maybe get a quick forecast so the residents also know. Previously, we had said that there'd be a agenda item for the farmers market, which is currently at Memorial Park, and also one for the Stevens Creek transit corridor. And so I'm wondering, do we have any idea when those might be coming back so that the community can also be at least somewhat aware?
I would imagine our city manager can speak a little bit more directly to the farmers market item. As for the transit item, I realize that it's on future agenda items. It's not something that I believe that we're looking at in either June or possibly maybe July. But Deb, do you have any insight into that? We could potentially move it.
The corridor one?
The one, okay, so first of all, the farmers market item, would you be prepared to provide a brief update on that in, say, our next council meeting on June 1st or the following one on June 15th?
Provide a brief update on that one.
Okay.
I think by next meeting.
Okay, and then with regard to Stevens Creek corridor transit, I didn't see it on our June 1st meeting in our agenda review. Is it something that, and I think we would probably need a bit of lead time in order to bring it into an agenda. So probably the meeting in July at the earliest is how I'm looking at it. But it's a very legitimate question. It's our major transit corridor. I will add, as an add-on to my own council report outs from our committee assignments, that one of the contacts that I had with staff at VTA talked about how a transit master plan could be helped and coordinated by VTA. So that maybe that's part of a larger effort. That is a multi-year effort. But I'm not suggesting that we initiate that as part of the corridor. But if we were to try to initiate that conversation, I think we would need at least about a month lead time, which I think puts us probably in the July meeting at this point.
Yeah. So the farmers market was not intended to get an update from the city manager. You know, my original request is that it come to the city council so that we can put in our input that we believe the community is concerned about, where it would be best located, things of that nature, not just to get an update from the city manager. This is, you know, we need to put our input, because that's an important, that's the graphics that's behind me. You know, I've heard from, you know, a lot of community, and we need to be able to make sure that that's being heard.
Okay, so Councilmember Willie, you're asking for more of a study session, or I guess it wouldn't necessarily be an ordinance, but some kind of mechanism to gather public input with regard to where people would like. Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, Vice Mayor Chow.
Oh, I believe that we do take public comments for future agenda items. So in case I don't have any item to say, but then I believe we do accept public comment. So in case any public wants to speak.
Okay, I just don't recall us doing that in the past.
It occurred usually during oral communications, and then if council wants to propose it, they can propose it during the future.
Right, right. So our typical mechanism has been to open up oral communications and then have that, well, not typical, this is a recent item that's been added, brief council comments following oral communications. So I think I think we're at a point where I don't see any other hands raised from our public. Although actually I do see two hands raised from our public, but none from our council. Well, we do have a few minutes. Let me do this. If the video division can set the timer at a minute, we'll go ahead and check in with the public members with their hands up. Bruce Parsons, as well as Lisa Warren. Bruce, you'll have a minute to speak on this particular item. We're talking about proposed future agenda items, and welcome back, Bruce. Okay, Bruce, you'll need to unmute yourself. We can't actually hear you.
Sorry. How's that?
Yeah, we can hear you now, yes.
If you move grant funding to June 1st council meeting, I would appreciate it if you could put it at the top of the agenda instead of at the bottom of the agenda.
It'll be there.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Lisa Warren, welcome, Lisa.
Hi. So I know there's at least one communication from the public that was sent on this agenda, item 18 subject, and I'm just hoping that you will all take the time to read that before June 1st. And I know there was one, there could have been more. So hopefully the people that sent them will resend them, but I just don't want anything important to get lost because it was delayed.
Thank you, Lisa. Our next public speaker is Gilbert Wong. Welcome, Gilbert, followed by Kieran Varshnaya. Welcome, Gilbert.
Hello, Mayor Paul and the City Council. So I understand due to the lateness, item number 18 was continued to the next meeting, and it was kind of you to put it first. My question is to the City Attorney that if it's agendized for tonight on item number 18 and the council so choose to vote to move it to another item, you still need to open the public hearing since you have folks came to a publicized meeting 72 hours prior and they've been waiting since 6:45 p.m. like me, and then you did the right thing by continuing it. You should at least, as a courtesy, give a 1 hour notice or something, or at least open public comments as people waited to this time. But thank you very much for being mindful of the time.
All right, thank you very much, Gilbert. We'll go to Kieran, our final speaker. Welcome, Kieran.
Yes, hello. Thank you for the opportunity. It's a late hours, so Mayor Darcy, Paul, council members, and city staff. Yes, same request as Bruce, one of the previous inputs. This agenda item, if you could please put it up front in the June 1st meeting, we'd really appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Karen. And again, we're trying as diligently as we can to get to the entirety of agendas. Thank you for being the very nice and excellent community that we are in understanding. Yes, you do have our commitment that we will put this at the top of our June 1st agenda. Madam City Attorney, just to clarify the point, if we don't get to an agenda item, I don't know whether there's any advisability to open it up to public comment, but I think logically it probably shouldn't be open to public comment, correct? If the item itself is not considered by the city council.
Yeah, I mean, you either open the item and consider it and take public comment, or you continue it to another date, table it to another date, and
right.
You wouldn't take public comment.
Right, and the mechanism of tabling an item is not unique, right? I mean, that's something that is done in other agendas when time constraints are limited.
You could start an item and then table it to another meeting.
And continue it. Okay.
Finish
Great.
it.
Well, thanks very much. I have one more hand raised. It is from Vice Mayor Chow. And Vice Mayor Chow, I think will perhaps provide you last word before we adjourn.
Okay, I now have an agenda to propose. First, I think the continue of tabling the item is kind of new. So can we request that all the emails, all the written comments today for this item will be appended to the agenda of June 1st, so that people don't have to write again. And then unfortunately, people who are waiting here to speak have to come to speak again. I don't know how to fix that. But I would like to talk about the public comment process, because in the Cupertino Union, they still have people write out the speaker form so that people can fill it out ahead of time. They don't have to wait for that 3 minutes window to raise hand, because we have people who just miss that window. And so I wondered, should we talk about that process?
Okay, that's a great procedural suggestion. And so I'll be very happy to examine that and interface with staff as to what the best deliverable for council and public consideration is, as to how we perhaps adjust our processes to make it more open and more timely for many people to participate in these commentaries. So, okay, with that, I'll go ahead and adjourn our meeting. Thank you very much for a very productive evening, and we will see you at our next regular city council meeting on June 1st. Meeting adjourned.